Zhang. It was the tone in Lazi's voice that stopped me. Not fear or warning, but relief. Lazi broke into a huge beaming smile at the giant zombie woman. She hadn't noticed or understood what I was doing, spinning up my reality-breaking mathematics, setting fire to my mind. As far as she knew, I'd sagged and stumbled against her in pure shock at Zheng's arrival. Perhaps we weren't so similar after all. One heartbeat of hesitation, hyperdimensional mathematics stalled, stuttered, guttered out, blinking and flickering across the surface of my consciousness. My eyelids spasmed and my jaw locked up. I shuddered, snorted down a tide of nausea. Curled up around my belly, almost fell over, but Lazi held me up. I'd worked for weeks to smooth the flow of the impossible equations as much as possible, an inevitable sequence from first principle to the end result, to spare me the pain. Now I strangled an equation at the last moment, fought it back down into memory and brain stem. Heather. It's okay, she's fine if I'm here, I can tell her to do whatever I want. Lazi beamed at me, then back at the impassive, staring zombie. What happened to your arm? A silent pause, except for my whining. Zheng. That was me, I croaked out. I hung off Lazi's shoulder, my knees shaking. At least I wasn't bleeding, yet. What? Heather. The arm, I said. Ah. No, they wouldn't send Zheng, that oh. Lazi's face fell and she looked back at Zheng with a sudden shake to her smile. She rattled out something in a language I'd never heard before. Ta bidniag dagaj bisan yu. Zheng. Has he oh no. Na meg san such. Whatever she'd said, Zheng wasn't listening. The zombie raised her right hand and pointed with one long finger, over our heads, up. That looks like an order, I managed. Zheng. Come on, please, listen to me. It's me. Walk, Zheng rumbled. Dead lips barely moved. Voice like granite. Lazi swallowed and wiped filthy hair away from her face. I think my brother's got her. Like, fully. He's not supposed to, no. Zheng, you're not supposed to listen to him. Walk, Zheng repeated. She took a step forward and we both stumbled back, still clinging to each other. I think your brother wants to see us, I said. Yeah. Yeah, Lazi whispered. Zheng took another step. Lazi tried to back away again, a tight animal whimper caught in her throat, but I held on to her and held my ground. My stomach hurt, my head throbbed, my lungs ached. I stared Zheng right in the eyes, watching those dead, glassy orbs for any reaction. Heather. Lazi hissed. She tugged on my arm. Zheng stared back at me. You don't frighten me. Not right now. Took me a moment to realize I'd spoken, those were my words and they were true. Goodness, I'd actually said those words to this hulking 7-foot demon host monster thing. The calm in my own voice surprised me, but this wasn't courage. I didn't feel brave or defiant. This calm grew from somewhere else, a cold, slow, numb place. Perhaps I'd feel the raw terror later, like a bruise. I let my eyes drift over to the cages once more, and the desiccated, bound corpses inside. Back to Zheng, back to those eyes. May as well be empty sockets. She took another step forward, loomed over us, body language as empty and mute as the rest of her. Lazi dug her fingers into my arm and shoulder, breathing in panicked jerks. Why don't you just grab us? I asked the zombie. No answer. You're strong enough and fast enough. We're two, but we're both small. And apparently I didn't wound you that badly. Zheng lowered her right arm, the one she'd been pointing with, but that could have meant anything. I wasn't sure if my words were getting through, but then she twitched the fingers of her reattached left arm. Once, twice, 3 times. Her mangled shoulder spasmed. That's right. I nodded slowly. That was me. You remember, don't you? Twitch, twitch. She managed to bend her thumb inward. Beneath the coating of drying blood, Zheng's exposed left arm was covered in the most detailed and complex tattoos I'd ever seen. Looping, whirling, spiraling lines in a jumbled thicket upon the corded muscle, each line formed from thousands of tiny letters, overlapping so many times that her skin was like reused parchment, each layer of inscription faded or improperly erased. I didn't want to get close enough to find out, but I suspected the pattern covered her whole torso. I might not be able to zap you outside from here, I continued, low and quiet. But I can hurt you again. You understand that, don't you? What? Lozzie murmured. I glanced sidelong at her, found her eyes as alarmed as they could be under those permanently droopy lids. The bruise on her face was so livid up close. You can't do that. With your mind? With the math? Lozzie shook her head. Please don't. Heather, please. She's sort of my friend. I shook my head too, still numb inside. Not right now, she isn't. She is, Lozzie hissed. She is. She's still in there. Zheng. Lozzie tried again, voice weak. The zombie just stared. I hope you're thinking what I'm thinking, whatever you are, I said to Zheng. Can you even give me a reply? I wasn't thinking about those dead children in cages. I wasn't angry about them or motivated by them, nothing so clean and clear. That came later, a retroactive justification. A good one, yes, the right thing to do, but it wasn't why I made the decision in that moment, numb and shaking from the suppressed brain math, in silent, unspoken negotiation with a demon inside a barely human shell. Zheng looked up, the way she'd been pointing. A good enough reply for me. Okay. Lozzie, I think it's time we went to see your brother, I said. Lozzie stared at me for a moment as if I was the mad one. Perhaps I was. My resolve didn't hold. The zombie herded us along the metal walkways, down the route we'd have taken anyway. Or perhaps she was merely following us now, though I found I didn't care. I didn't care if my impulsive, half-formed idea had worked or not. I had no real plan, just a drive. Zheng wouldn't have needed to tackle us or grab us anyway, there was only one path and she was too large, too strong, too fast to dodge around or outrun, even if I hadn't been clenched up tight around the echo of pain in my guts and head. Don't you want to get out of here too, Zheng? Said Lozzie. Zaz. Tuniik Kaya. Lozzie was being a very good sport, arm under my shoulders as we hurried ahead of the zombie's advance. She didn't complain when I stumbled and clutched at her for support. Zheng didn't even really watch us, as she forced us away from the metal platform and back among the spars and spears of green gold rock. She stared at a point above my head, expression empty. I felt a guilty relief in getting away from those cages, those corpses, that evidence of cruelty, when the platform finally vanished out of sight behind too many twists and turns. But I knew it was still there, unrecorded and unmarked, and in some ways that was worse. You don't have to listen to my brother, Lozzie whined to Zheng, voice returning distant echoes from the vault above and below. Remember all the things we said to each other, when I took you to Lemuria, in the dream? Weren't we supposed to be you and me, right? She tapped her ribs, just over her heart, face torn back and forth between fear and betrayed sorrow. Use your own willpower. Come on please. I don't think she's listening, I croaked. But, Lozzie shook her head, almost in tears. It'll be okay, I said. Everything will be okay. I was terrible at reassurance. I was no Rain, all smiles and confidence and heroic gestures. I knew I sounded cold and hollow, but as I spoke I realized I was talking to myself, shoring myself up. My numb conviction was beginning to ebb. What on earth was I thinking? I had no real plan, no idea where my friends were, no idea if I had the resolve to see this impulse to the end. The journey through the cave gave me too much time to think, to second-guess myself, to realize what I'd done. In a moment of shock and fear I'd gone straight for the hyperdimensional mathematics. A reflex, self-defense. My certainty hollowed itself out as we tracked through the cave, less in touch with that moment of instinctive mathematics, that tension held tight on the edge of the possible, ready to break physics in a dozen ugly ways, with no care for consequences. Could I really do it, pulverize Zheng into steaming meat? Maybe, yes, and I'd pay for it with vomiting and pain and unconsciousness, but that wasn't the question. Could I do it in cold blood? No, it won't be okay. Oh, Heather, she was so close. Lozzie sniffed and wiped at her nose. We'd gotten her so close to ignoring him. I don't know how to break it, but I had her so close. She was going to strangle my brother for me, if you couldn't, you know. I grunted. Zheng forced us around a final right-hand turn. A monolithic wall of green gold towered above us, wounded by an entrance to another cult-cut tunnel, rough steps vanishing upward through the glowing rock. The way up was far less regular than the first tunnel. I guessed this one had been dug as exploration rather than access, with long straight stretches, tight hairpin bends, a snaking progress upward out of the green depths. The walls slowly lost their brilliant light, faded into the dead gray of the castle corpse, until the tunnel finally burst through the floor into open air. Lozzie and I stumbled to a halt together, my legs burned with the effort of climbing, knees trembling and stomach clenched. She'd had to almost drag me the last few dozen steps, her twitchy energy holding out where mine was spent. I hung onto her shoulders for support. At least keeping me standing seemed to take her mind off her own fear. We'd emerged into a long gallery with a high ceiling, the walls more open window than grey jade, though without any glass or glass analog to fill the openings. Tendrils of fog lapped at the windows. We were high up above the copied mile of Sharrowford, sunk in the mist far below. Vast planetary shapes stirred in the shrouded firmament above, and I realized with tentative relief that the cosmic whale song noise had stopped. Lights, bedrolls, a bucket of tools, a closed laptop on an overturned crate, this part of the castle was obviously inhabited. Another gallery marched off on the other side of a connecting doorway. Muffled sounds of soft conversation floated through from beyond. A cultist scrambled up from his vantage point at one of the windows, where he'd been bent over a cheap telescope. "You!" he said at us. Oh hell, He looked more like a student teacher than an evil cultist, a young man with mousy hair and a baby face, his cream robes open on a shirt and trousers, as if he'd come straight from work. A distant part of me wondered if Alexander imposed a dress code on his underlings. The cultist slapped at his robes, then at his trouser pockets. I couldn't help but notice he had a bloody bandage around one hand. I gave him the best stink eye I could. "Don't try it. I'll kill you." "You know I can," I said, heaving for breath. He stared at me in utter confusion. We never had to find out what Lucas was not going to try, because he sighed with sudden relief. Jing emerged behind us. She stopped as soon as she stood free of the wound in the floor, a robot waiting for further input. "Oh, thank the gods beyond, you found her," he said to Zheng. "Wait, down there." Bloody hell, he rubbed his hands together, then thumbed over his shoulder. "Go on, he's through there, he'll want to. I don't know. Oi, can you hear me, or what?" Zheng made no response. Was this my moment? Flagging resolve fumbled against years of habitual conflict avoidance, against the timid, reclusive Heather, against the me that wanted to sit in comfortable libraries with beautiful books and forget about the rest of the world, against the me curled up in bed waiting for rain to get home. I tried to focus, numb and cold and slow, but this wasn't Alexander, this was not the head of the snake. Not yet. That was my excuse. The young cultist Lucas glanced over his shoulder at the doorway, and Lozzie took the opening. She let go of me, no warning, and I almost tumbled to the floor as she flew at him, one hand raised to claw out his eyes or throat. She was half his size, but she was ready to bite his face off. Zheng moved like quicksilver. She lashed out and caught Lozzie by the wrist. Lazi yelped, like a dog on the end of a choking leash. Her feet left the ground with her momentum and she scrambled for purchase. Zheng held her struggling at arm's length. Zheng. Zheng, no. Come on. Arg. Let me go, let me dash. Zheng shook her, rattled her brains, Lazi's feet skittering against the floor and head whipping around. I flinched at the violence. Lazi yelped and spluttered, then stared at Zheng, panting in quiet panic. I shook my head. Good. Now, we're all going to go talk to Mr. Lilban. Nice and slow, and nobody does anything stupid. Got that? Right? I nodded. He pointed at the doorway to the adjoining gallery. Good. You go first. I tried to catch Lazi's eyes, but she'd shut down. She hung limp from Zheng's grip like her strings had been cut, hidden by a curtain of hair. I murmured her name. She's faking it, the cultist said. Come along now. You first. Alone, even Lazi had left me behind, in a way. Alone except for the eye, always in the back of my head. I had nothing else to hold on to. The next gallery had fewer windows, corners lost to the shadows unfilled by weak electric light. At the far end, carved into the gray surface of the wall, surrounded by expanding concentric rings of white paint magic circle and layers of jumbled, mad inscription, stood a gateway. Just like the one Evelyn had built to bring us here. It was closed right now, deactivated, showing only blank stone in the wide door-shaped middle. Where does that lead? I asked out loud. No idea how I found the courage. What? That's none of your business, is it? Turn right, through the door there. Go on. I did as I was told, hobbled along, half crouched for support, wanting so desperately to sit down. Zheng dragged Lazi along behind me. I stepped through a wide doorway, pulled myself up a short flight of stairs, and emerged into the Sharrowford cult's true inner sanctum. Ah, Lavinia, there you are. A sigh, deep and satisfied, made my skin crawl. It was a throne room, or maybe an audience chamber, with a raised area toward the rear, flanked by tall ceiling-height empty windows. Gray light flooded through the windows, lit everything with a half-dead look. Magical workings dominated one side of the room. A series of interlocking magic circles and looping Sanskrit words had colonized the floor and part of a wall, as if projected at an angle. Glancing at it made my head swim far worse than before, like I was standing on a wall and looking down at the floor. Several large chunks of the green-gold stone formed fulcrum points or anchors for the pattern. A mess of partially dismantled medical machines lay in a pile nearby, stolen from a hospital or some disused dental office, pieces of their mechanical guts added to the magical design, radioactive sources, bits of laser lens. Somehow I doubted even Evelyn could make sense of this one. A pair of folding tables stood at the rear of the room, littered with hypodermic needles and bags of drugs, bits of hand-drawn map and bottles of unspeakable fluid, a ceremonial knife and a human skull, a closed book and an open first aid kit. Two cultists looked up as I entered, as Zheng pulled Lazi up alongside me. A small, worried gentleman with glasses and brilliant ginger hair was bent over the tables. The heavy-set man with the squashed nose, the one who'd been on the battlements with Alexander, had been speaking softly. He wore medical gloves, hands full of gauze, bloody towel over one shoulder, as he tended to his master in the middle of the room. Alexander Lilban himself sat on a stool, stripped to the waist, digging around inside his own chest with a pair of pliers. It's me, our cultist guide, Lucas, said as he trotted past us. She just came up from the core with them, but no sign of the rest. Boss? My mind clung hard to those last few words, no sign of the rest. Oh, my wayward sister, how you always return to me, Alexander said. His mouth curled into a smile as he regarded us, as if delighted to see old friends. His cheek twitched as he pulled the pliers from the hole in his chest with a sucking sound. And Lavinia, I see you have decided to join us. Yes, very good, very good indeed. I think it's high time we turned this unpleasantness to our mutual advantage. He turned to the young cultist. Thank you, Lucas. How are the gods Spawn? Calmed, I think. They've stopped wailing, at least. I can hear that part for myself. Or not hear it, as it were. Alexander smiled at his own terrible joke. Bullets won't kill you, right? I said, very quietly. No calm voice now. That numb illusionary courage did not survive the sight of him. Alexander was covered in his own blood, smeared across his soft, flabby chest and down his belly, all over his hands and hairy forearms, in fingerprints and palm marks. Some sensible soul had spread towels underneath him, but they were soaked through by now. He'd widened the bullet hole Rain had put in his chest, peeled back his own skin and strips of muscle, exposed the white of his rib bones and the bellows fluttering of a lung, just visible through the ragged wound. Fragments of shattered rib lay discarded at his feet, dug out from the bullet's path. He showed no pain at all. With exaggerated care, he placed the pliers on the table next to him and raised his eyebrows at me. I'm sorry, what was that? I didn't quite catch your words. Do speak up, Lavinia, please. I am not feeling my best at present, and I am understandably a little distracted with concern for my poor sister here. In the corner of my eye, I saw Lozzie shiver and try to make herself smaller. I said, my voice shook. I clamped down hard on that tremor and forced myself to straighten up, to look him in the eye. No sign of the rest, which meant Rain and Evie and Twill were still free, unaccounted for. Stand up straight, Heather. Bullets won't kill you, will they? I repeated. Alexander's trio of cultist underlings found this rather amusing. They laughed silently, shook their heads, shared sidelong glances. Alexander went through a laborious performance, looking down at himself and acting surprised at the gaping fist-sized rent in his chest. Oh, this? He asked, then laughed, that horrible blubbery baby laugh. No, no, far from it, indeed. Don't you worry about my health, Lavinia. I will still be up and walking around when the bones of all these fine fellows here have fallen to dust. The wiry cultist and Lucas both looked uncomfortable, but the stocky one tending to Alexander's exit wound merely rolled his eyes, as if he'd heard that one 100 times before. Still, rather irritating, Alexander continued. I already know everything there is to know about the workings of my own body. Self-repair is such a bore. I hope it is as irritating as possible, I said. I tried to feel that anger, cold and slow, but it wouldn't come. I hope you get shot many more times. Regardless. Alexander waved a hand. That is all beside the point right now. Shouldn't get too far off topic, should we? I was not vulnerable, that's what I told myself, that's what kept me on my feet and my spine at least vaguely straight. I could kill everyone in this room with a thought. I could, I told myself I could, I knew I could. Couldn't I? First off, I think some congratulations are in order. Well done, Jing. Alexander reached over to the table and picked up a small metal cylinder, covered with occult runes. A stopper of black wax at the top showed a hole in the middle. He waggled it in her general direction, an amused smile playing across his lips. I'll just get rid of this, shall I? We won't be needing it, will we? Or perhaps I'll hold on to it for now. We'll see what happens next. If Jing felt anything she didn't show it. The zombie stared at a point on the far wall. Every now and again, Lozzie twitched or struggled in her grip, eyes glazed over, breathing hard and ragged. Now, sister. Alexander clicked his fingers twice. Pay attention now. Lauren, he snapped, and Lozzie's head whipped up as if slapped. She blinked and panted, staring at her brother. He sighed and shook his head, gave her one of those sickly warm smiles that turned my stomach. I am very unimpressed with you. I'm sure you know that already, as I am certain you anticipate punishment. You do deserve punishment, for bringing these people here. You know that too, I hope. Lassie's teeth chattered. She tried to shrink back, but Zheng held her fast. Now, Zheng, if you would bring her here, I dash. I'm going to kill you, I blurted out. I didn't just want to hurt him, I wanted him to know I wanted to. I told myself I wanted to. Alexander glanced at me, blinking several times in mock surprise. Why isn't she restrained? The wiry copper-haired cultist asked. I thought this one was meant to be dangerous. Not here, she ain't, the big one grunted. Can't do zip, can you, dear? Try it, I managed to squeak. Ah 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 ah. Alexander raised his hands. As we have already discovered, Lavinia does not respond well to physical encouragement. In fact, it gives her the courage to defend herself. Isn't that right, Lavinia? Stop calling me that. You can't kill me, he said, raising a finger. In here you can't send me or anyone to the beyond. You are powerless, exactly as you would be in the real world against somebody of my place and standing and wealth. You must learn to listen, Lavinia, to negotiate, even from a position of weakness. Threats will get you nowhere. They didn't know. Lassie hadn't known I could do anything except teleporting, dimension hopping. They must have remembered I could turn away a bullet, but I had a wrecking ball in my mind and they didn't know. Was that an advantage, or not? I had no idea what to do with this secret. I needed to use it, somehow. Alexander must have taken my quiet hesitation as acquiescence. Now, Lauren, sister, his voice gentled but never lost that smug undertone. Despite the things you do, despite the things you have done to our family, I am still, as always, your loving brother. Lassie whined, sniffed, hanging from Zheng's arm. I forgive you, he continued. I forgive you for letting these people in here, for betraying me, for getting me shot by one of them, for causing me problems. As I have always forgiven you, for our parents, for yourself. For you and I are all we have, aren't we? Aren't we, Lauren? That worm in the brain, that catch in his words. I suppressed a wince and glanced over at Lassie. She gulped and bit her lip, small and dirty and cringing. She jerked her head up and down, once, twice. A nod. Lassie, you don't have to listen to him, I hissed. She shook her head and looked at me sidelong, guilty and afraid. I could almost see the lump in her throat. If Zheng lets you go, Alexander said. Will you be good and come here, come to your brother? Nod. Zheng, if you please. The zombie did as she was told. Lassie crumpled the moment she was free, fell to her knees, sobbing gently. I moved to catch her shoulders, to put my arms around her before she could give in and go to her brother, but Alexander twitched a finger in command and Zheng's arm shot out like a snake to bar my way, so quick I flinched back in surprise. Come here, Alexander repeated. Lassie, don't, I hissed. It's nothing compared to family, Lavinia. Nothing at all, he said. Lassie nodded, wiped her nose on her sleeve, then picked herself up and slunk over to her brother, head down like a whipped dog. Now it was my turn to feel a lump in my throat. I couldn't bear the sight of this. Now, there was no need for any of your earlier behavior, was there? Alexander said to her. No need for all that tantrum and nastiness. You're such a sweet girl when you simply relax and allow yourself to be. He reached out and cupped her bruised cheek, the bruise he'd left on her. His bloody hand left a crimson smear on her skin. Lassie shivered, her eyes down. I'd never felt such indignant disgust. I know what you really want, what you really crave, and I will give it to you. You will have as many playmates as you desire in time. Now, sit at my side. No, not on the blood, no need to get messy. Just there we go. Lassie folded herself cross-legged on the floor by his side, hunched over with arms folded to protect her belly, eyes lowered in shadow. In the last moment as she sat down, in the split second that Alexander's eyes left her and began to move back to me, her hand darted out and palmed something glinting and sharp out of the open first aid kit on the table. She slid it up her sleeve. I froze, inside and out, expecting one of the trio of cultists to raise a voice, or tackle her, or Alexander to notice what she'd done. None did. They'd been looking away, embarrassed by the exchange of sickly sweet false sibling affection. I'd seen, Jing must have too, but the zombie didn't react. I let relief flood me. We were still on. Equal parts disgust and hope pretend courage. I forced my trembling fingers to pull the brain math notebook from my hoodie's front pocket. I felt the glow stick in there too, but what use could that be? Ah. What is this? Alexander asked. Are you going to take minutes? He reached down and stroked Lozzie's hair, without taking his eyes from me, leaving another bloody streak on her. This is what I'm going to use to kill you, I said, and forced my chin up. Defiant, confident, unafraid. I was none of those things, but I pretended. He sighed. And I suppose that's how you managed to do serious damage to Jing. You hit her with a book. Yes, I hit her with a book. Completely straight-faced. I did it, I said, flush for one wonderful moment with power over this man. Very quickly, I wished I hadn't spoken. Alexander stared for a moment, then a shrewd fascination lit up his features, staring at me with something akin to awe. I felt a terrible shiver. You are telling the truth, he breathed. Tell me. I swallowed, tried to hold on to that moment of confidence. I can kill everyone in this room with a thought. A bluff? I didn't know. As I glanced at the other three cultists, they certainly seemed to share their master's belief, faces clouded with concern. That's how I hurt your zombie. Then do it, please, show me. Alexander leaned forward, dripping gore from his chest wound, deep desire written on his face. Show me. I have waited so long for my sister to show the slightest ability of true control, of manipulation, of understanding. Show me. I stared back at him. No. Lavinia, I know you are not lying, but ah. He frowned. I see. You can't. I can. No, no. He raised a finger. You can, that is the truth, but you can't. How odd. You do perplex me, Lavinia. Good. You tell impossible truths, at least ones that you yourself believe, and then lo and behold I discover that some of them are rooted in fact. Alexander raised his chin, that shrewd, questioning exterior crust over a barely concealed ocean of self-assurance. Is this conversation going how you imagined it would? I managed to say. Why do your whole megalomania act? Because you get off on it. Does it make you feel big and powerful? Why not just take what you want from me? He didn't take my bait, it was weak. I was scrambling for time, playing catch-up. Hoping my friends would turn up, that rain would rescue me. The more this went on, that clean, clear impulse felt further and further away. I had a plan, I just couldn't do it, not without the protection of that soul numbness I'd felt earlier. Not without the need for self-defense. I wasn't Rain. You see, it is entirely my fault we are at this unfortunate loggerheads with each other, he continued. I misunderstood you. Your desires, your drives, your personal history. If I had known, I would have taken a very different approach to you, Lavinia. And now I know you have gained some measure of real control, well, I would have told you what we are doing here, the importance of our work, what it means. You mean the importance of dead children in cages? I asked, and finally felt a good clean anger that was better. I saw your dirty secret down there. The ends justifies the means, Lavinia. I'm sure you, of all people, will agree, once you understand those ends. I don't want to know what this place is for. A lie. I can guess. Ah. Alexander still seemed genuinely fascinated. And what is your guess? You forced people to talk with that thing you have underground. Thing. Thing. A very precise word, Lavinia. That thing is a yoked god. Caught, drawn here by my hour, he gestured at the trio of cultists, trap, 20 years ago now. To learn from it, to take all that outside knowledge for our own. But, I am getting ahead of myself. It's a scab, Lozzie muttered. Yes, yes, a favorite word of our little Lauren's. More like an impact crater than a scab. All this place, this dimensional pocket is like misaimed camouflage. A wounded chameleon with misfiring neurons, trying to hide itself. I don't want to. No, I repeated. It is important you understand. You see, I have done a little more research into you, Lavinia. A sickening smile crested. A triumph, a trump card flourished from a rhetorical sleeve. He paused, savoring the moment. I stared. Said nothing. Didn't give him the satisfaction. Considered spitting on the floor, but 19 years of being a good girl sort of ruled that out, even here. You see, I have asked relevant questions of those entities correctly placed to know, he continued. I assumed so wrongly, such arrogance on my part that you were mentally ill, or misled, or had constructed an elaborate interior life that never really was. But then I discovered. Discovered what? I hissed, to cover the pounding of my heart. You do have a twin sister. Or, did. Violation. Maisie's space in my heart, my greatest source of strength, the one thing this horrible man hadn't known about me, hadn't torn bleeding from my past, lay open for all to hear. My head felt hot, tight, a pinching pain in the back of my mind. The other three cultists, they knew as well now, they'd heard those words, and it meant nothing to them. The big man was too busy fussing over the exit wound on Alexander's back. Violation, my most secret thing casually exposed without so much as a fanfare. What was her name, Lavinia? Alexander asked. I blinked, swallowed, forced myself to focus through the impotent anger. I wanted to punch him, but that wasn't enough. Her reality, I said, haltingly, then swallowed and forced myself onward. Should burst your eardrums, make you bleed from the eyes, kill you. Where we went, where she still is, I can send you there, you know. If you want to learn her name. Not from here, you can't. Her name, if you please. I had no more comebacks. I'd never felt so angry, but that wasn't enough. My fingers opened the brain math notebook, but I couldn't look down at the pages. He had me hooked, in the back of my mind, in a quiet, selfish place that I would never admit. I knew where he was going with this. I know what happened to you and your twin, Alexander said. He took a deep breath and leaned back, then winced, the first sign of pain I'd seen on his face. The cultist tending to his wound grumbled, tore off a piece of gauze and set to his work again. I hoped it hurt. No you don't, I said. Or you'd go mad. He laughed, bubbly and disgusting. Lozzie sniffed behind her curtain of hair. She started to speak, a half-word. A crash, distant and very loud, somewhere below us in the castle. Like stone on stone, and a muffled shout. Alexander frowned. The cultists all glanced at one another. Lucas, Adam, Alexander said with a flick of his fingers toward the doors. Lucas and the wiry cultist hurried out of the room together, footsteps vanishing into the passageway beyond. My friends are coming to kill you, I said. No, I will have Zheng kill them all, he said. And yes, I do have some vague, sketched general idea of what happened to you. And it doesn't take a psychologist to understand what it's done to you. Shut up. Stop talking. You have experienced firsthand how vulnerable we really are, we human beings, all of us, when exposed to that outside our limited sphere, the reality of the universe, the wolves that lurk just outside the door, a door that 99% of the human race cannot even see. We're so short-sighted, so wrapped up in our animal concerns, we barely see 50 years into the future, or to the country next door, let alone into the spheres beyond our own fragile little globe. He loved the sound of his own voice, but he was right, about that part. Wasn't he? Get to the point. Alexander nodded. There was something serious about him now, a glint in his eye. What happened to you can happen to anybody. Wouldn't you want to stop it ever happening again? To all humanity? Because that is what we are doing here. We are growing strong, we are stealing secrets from the gods, we are making difficult sacrifices for the greater good. We do not have to bow to these outside principles as gods, we do not have to accept a future as ants. Imagine, if you will, that the things you have experienced, one day, come to our reality en masse. What would that look like? What would our future look like, Lavinia? He raised an eyebrow when I didn't answer, gestured for me to speak. I shrugged. I am serious, he continued. It is a serious question. I don't know, yet, exactly what you experienced beyond the boundary of our reality, as a child, and I would like you to tell me, in time. But we are all children here. Imagine, all of us, all the people you know, exposed to the same thing. What would our future look like? Please. There wouldn't be one. Where are you going with this? You are a vision of a different future, a glimpse into the potential future of the species. He leaned forward, earnest, face brimming with zeal. Do you understand what I am saying? Our future, human future, is a choice between eventual destruction and madness, or change, evolution, into an open hand, a smile. Something very much like what you are becoming, what my sister is halfway toward. Do you understand? Answer, please. I am trying, so very hard, to make you understand. I wanted to say, and I am trying to kill you, or spit at him, or tell him he was wrong. He was wrong. Wasn't he? The anger, the relief, all of it was flagging now, gnawed by a scared part of myself, a part that wanted more than anything to feel safe and strong. My greatest unsolved problem was how to combat the I, how to actually rescue my sister. I was weak, small, fragile. What if there were a dozen of me, or 100? What if I knew how to make this dripping black mathematical hell work for me? What if I could be strong? Would the end justify the means? He saw it on my face, and smiled. I'm not going to treat you like some stupid, petty little follower, to be expended for a temporary advantage. I'll even let your friends live say may prove difficult, she won't agree with this, but I promise. I will make it work. Join me in this effort, try to understand, and I won't kill them. Do you understand what I am offering you? I shook my head, numb, trying not to answer. Trying to focus. I am offering you a chance to make sure that what happened to you and your sister never happens again. Can noble intention remain untainted, no matter the method used to reach the goal? Alexander finished his proselytizing, and I knew he wasn't lying. Too much passion in him for this be an act, to get me to drop my guard. Besides, what did I have that he couldn't take by force? I'd rarely felt so weak and small, with Jing towering beside me, lost in this unplace. My friends might be about to rescue me, but Alexander's pitch wasn't a ploy to save his own skin. He shone with confidence. If Rain and the others made it here, he was certain he could kill them. This rotten blood-soaked ogre perched on a stool, this eater of children, he wanted to convince me he was right. And he was. The stocky cultist tending to Alexander's exit wound cleared his throat. Boss, we dash. Shoo, shoo shoo shoo. Alexander hushed him with a delicately raised hand. Lavinia is considering our offer. Let's not interrupt her calculations, that would be so terribly rude. I knew Lozzie was trying to catch my eye, peeking out from behind her mass of filthy hair, from where she sat on the floor next to her brother. She had a plan, didn't she? A sharp trick up her sleeve. Was I still part of that plan? Alexander was right. Maisie and I had been kidnapped, stolen, torn apart, and I'd been left half alive. Now I had a few friends who understood that, who understood me. A ragged band of fools, and we were planning to what? We had a few vaguely sketched intentions, all of which relied on my mastery of an abyss I barely understood and which nearly killed me every time I dipped into it. But the Sharrowford cult. These people had trapped and bound an alien god. They tapped it for power, commanded its spawn, and built their own pocket dimension around a wound in its hide. You are right, I said, so softly, barely a whisper. Alexander broke into a grin, the most satisfied I'd ever seen a human face. And I'm still going to kill you, I continued. Can you use an evil tool, and yet remain unchanged? Not only the dead and mutated children in the cages underground, but also the homeless people turned into zombies, each one of them was or had been somebody's missing person, somebody else's Maisie. Yes, these people had bound a god. Allying with this monster might be the best chance I'd ever have of actually rescuing my sister, and I had to say no. Alexander sighed with theatrical disappointment. This idiotic bravado is unbecoming of you, Lavinia. Be realistic now, you are not going to kill Dash. The end does not justify the means. The means determines the nature of the end. I made myself believe those words, no matter how weak my voice. When I rescued my sister, she would see me, not a self-loathing monster in my place. Alexander rolled his eyes, as if I was willfully ignorant, a naive and idealistic girl, an idiot on the way to self-destruction. Perhaps he was right about that too. I felt a pinprick of real confidence, real conviction, not so slow and numb anymore. He rolled the little metal cylinder in his hand as if bored, his eyes leaving me and drifting to Zheng. I tensed up, expected her to grab me at any moment, but I forced myself to concentrate, to look down at the notebook in my hands. I flipped past a page of irrelevant mathematical notation. I knew what to look for now, I knew what to do. In cold blood, I had to do this. Nausea crept up my throat and a spike of pain jabbed the back of my head as I hurried through the equations. You think I'm— Alexander gestured with the metal cylinder. Bad? A cartoon villain, to Dash. You're evil, I said. Evil? Evil? Look at the world around us, Lavinia. He stabbed with his voice, hard and angry now, the anger of a powerful man spurned. Our world, the human world. I snuff out a few lives, yes, for an explicit purpose: knowledge, advancement, human survival. Not for the sake of my own enrichment, not for national power or personal prestige or for corporate profit, but for all of us. For a higher cause. The world is full of people far worse than I, Lavinia, look at me. I winced and fought to keep my eyes on the page. I said, look at Dash. A shout echoed from somewhere below us, distorted by the winding sinus-like passageways of the corpse castle. Was that my name I'd heard? Was that Rain shouting for me? Then, unmistakable, a gunshot. Far away. Boss, the stocky cultist raised his voice in warning. Alexander jerked a hand up to silence his underling. His eyes tightened in strangled frustration. Humankind is a dead end, Lavinia. Being human is a dead end. If not from climate change and resource depletion, then from the beyond. Your very way of thinking, this insistence on an archaic system of ethics and morals will serve you nothing in the long run. It will see you dead, your bones dust. What use is this way of thinking, if it leads you to failure? You cling to it only because it makes you feel good, but it ensures you cannot kill me. I found the right lines of mathematics and swallowed hard. The correct repurposed dregs of the eye's lessons, separate scraps I was going to weld together with my mind, my stomach clenched up. Alexander was speaking again. I interrupted him with the first words I could think of. Why not get into that machine yourself then? Machine? He paused. The mind interface device? I did. I have. It didn't work on me. I am loath to admit so, but it gave me nothing. Is that not right, sister? Did it work on me? In my peripheral vision, I saw Lazi shake her head. You think I would sacrifice your precious innocence before myself? Lavinia, you are only trying to convince yourself to do what you know you cannot. You cannot kill me without convincing yourself I am a monster. Noises echoed through the gallery behind me now, shouting and crashes, a ripping sound, a scream, but I couldn't just wait for rescue. I'd never forgive myself. I had to prove Alexander wrong. If you admit it now, I will let your friends live, he said, voice a touch softer, a smugness returning to his lips as he spread his hands in mock mercy. If you persist in this nonsense, I will set Zheng on them when they arrive, and if by some miracle they survive that, I will do it myself. He pointed vaguely at the ceiling. Do you forget what I can command? My eyes tripped along the next line of equation and I felt the beginning of a white-hot burning inside my skull. My breath jerked, harder and sharper. The hyperdimensional mathematics began to slot into place, irresistible and unstoppable now, held tight in my mind. I grit my teeth, felt a nosebleed start, and finally looked up at Alexander. You can't kill me, Lavinia. You simply won't do it. Lozzie, I hissed through gritted teeth. Move. Aside. Lozzie half rose, unsure and skittish, her eyes darting between her brother and I. The stocky cultist frowned at her. I kept my focus on Alexander, felt the levers of reality slick and burning under my hands. He sighed and rolled his eyes, glanced at his nervous underling at last. She can't hurt you. Settle down. Yes, I can. I could barely speak. My head felt like it was going to explode and my eyes ached with fire, but I held on even as I trembled and struggled to stay standing, as I felt blood drip from my nose and leak from the corners of my eyes. I pushed the equation further, complicated it, added layers. Bullets wouldn't kill him, this needed to be final. No, you can't, Alexander snapped, the last word spat in rage. He rose to his feet and pointed at me. Because you won't, because you are tied to a moral system which admits no legitimate breaking of human boundaries. This is a farce. He grinned and threw up his hands. Here, I will make your surrender even easier. I will let your friends live regardless of the choice you make. You will all walk free. There, I have taken away even that excuse to kill me. You have no enlightened self-defense, no principles to stand on but simple moral outrage. You cannot kill me, because you refuse to become anything other than a human be-dash. The stocky cultist lunged to tackle me. Lozzie leapt to her feet, yanked the hidden scalpel out of her sleeve, and landed on the cultist like a mad pixie. I think she got the knife into his throat, but it all happened too fast for me to react. They went down in a tangle of limbs and slippery spurting blood. I flinched and shied away so hard I almost tripped over my own feet. Alexander sighed. He snapped 3 words in some angular, painful non-human language, a command at Zheng. With almost superhuman effort, through blood clogging my nose and dimming vision, I interrupted him by pulling the glow stick out of my hoodie's pocket and hurling it at his face. I missed, badly. It sailed past him, but distracted him just enough, made him trip over a syllable. You will not. Alexander screamed at the last second. Then I let go. This was no reflex, no scramble of self-defense, no fumbling in the ineffable dark. I lashed out with hyperdimensional mathematics fully conscious of what I was doing, after almost a minute and a half of painstaking, bleeding, brain-burning work. I made a decision, eyes wide open, and I followed it through. Heat, light, and a god-awful tearing noise, perhaps a hiss of superheated air, I never figured it out. A backwash of oven heat, a millisecond of sharp blue glow. It hit Alexander like a train. I barely understood that moment of destruction. It was so fast, too fast, and my vision was already throbbing and edged with black. A terrible sound deafened me, the instant shattering of every bone in a human body, the floor around Alexander cracking into a million shards, the stool he'd been sitting on splintered to nothing, the table next to him smashed aside. A wrecking ball of invisible force flung a pulped bloody wreck against the back wall of the throne room, smashed the wall itself open, and carried what was left of Alexander Lilban out into the grey fog and down over the side of the castle. Wish I'd heard the splat. I blacked out before I'd even begun to fall over. In that last moment of shock and release, with the throne room spinning around me and my head splitting open with white-hot fire, with vomit forcing its way up my throat to choke me, I had only one thought. I win. I was out cold when my friends burst into the room, but I'm told it was suitably dramatic. Pain rolled in the pit of my stomach, torturing me back to consciousness. My eyes were gummed shut. My mouth tasted of iron and bile. I was collapsed forward against a warm, firm surface, my neck lolling, legs dangling, something digging into the underside of my thighs. I was jerked to one side then the other, the sensation of motion, stopping, moving again. No energy to roll sideways, no energy to even moan. Muffled voices trickled through my dulled senses. Angry shouting, a huge clang of metal, a grunt. The reason I didn't panic is because I could smell Rain. Her sweat, mostly. Realization filtered through the brain fog, she was carrying me on her back. That's enough. That'll do for them. Evelyn, snapping, nearby. One more. Twill, shouting through too many sharp teeth. A loud twisting tear of metal, nails down a blackboard. I fought the aching muscles and the crust of blood around my eyes. Cracked my eyelids a millimeter or two, vision painful and blurry. Thick grey fog in copied Sharrowford buildings swirled and swam. We were outside the castle, beyond the cult's barrier of occult bollards. A dozen of the squat metal poles had been ripped out of the ground and strewn about. A wolfish form was busy uprooting another one. Twill. She ripped it from the ground and hurled it at indistinct figures in the fog. I tried to move my eyes and suffered a wave of nausea for my efforts. I don't know if it's possible for an optic nerve to hurt, but mine did. I stared at what I'm pretty sure was Preem. She held a smaller figure in a double arm lock. Twill, come on, Rain said, right next to my head. Parted my lips. Throat was so raw. -1 okay. Heather. Rain turned her head, but she couldn't meet my eyes at this angle. Her profile was so clear through the haze. Hey, you're awake. She awake. Lozzie, her eyes open. A small elfin face bobbed into my vision. I stared, half dead inside, unable to muster a reaction. Aha. Hey Heather. Lozzie said. I managed to blink, once. Okay. I hissed again. Yeah. That would be a yes, Rain said, loud and clear. Nobody's dead. It's okay, we're all gonna be okay. We'll be out of here in no time, I promise. Yay, I murmured. I closed my eyes again. I think I may have been delirious. I was certain I'd passed out, but I felt Rain moving, hurrying, the sound of many footsteps and the clipped anger of a short, tense argument. One voice I didn't recognize. A static crackle, a breath of cold against my face, a change of light behind my eyelids, a sudden blossom of soft warm orange. God damn it all to hell, I don't know how to close the blasted thing, Evelyn snapped. Break the wall, knock it down. That was Lozzie. Me. Ugh, fine, Twill grunted. A crack of shattering brick. Somebody let out a huge heartfelt sigh, followed by soft swearing. For a long moment I heard only distant birdsong and the thrum of far-off traffic. I trust we're all in one piece. Evelyn asked eventually. Accepting the obvious. Yes ma'am. Present and correct, Rain said, a grin in her voice. Here. Lozzie chirped. Blacked out again for a handful of seconds. Next thing I knew Rain was setting me down, sitting me upright on a cold wooden surface. I groaned and tried my best to cling to her, arms too weak. Couldn't force my hands to grip. Rain steadied me by the shoulders, brushing my sweat-soaked hair out of my face, touching me to bring me back. I tried to open my eyes again, painful and stinging against the light. Hey, Heather, it's okay, it's okay. We're out, we made it out. Rain smiled down at me. Her face was side-lit by the apricot and peach light of sunrise, as were the trees behind her and the beautiful arc of the sky and the silken morning clouds. Rain was sweaty and dirty and her hair was a mess and she had a smear of blood mine drying on her neck and all down the shoulder of her leather jacket. Best thing seen all day, I managed. Speaking hurt. Rain actually laughed, half in disbelief, shaking her head. You are invincible, Heather. Have I been rubbing off on you? I did a tiny shrug and wrapped my numb, weak arms around the pain in my belly and diaphragm. My head lolled, couldn't keep my neck straight. Hey, hold still for me, love. I need to look at that bruise on your head, Rain said, soft and coaxing, hands gentle and intimate on my face and forehead. Bruise? I muttered. Lozzie wriggled onto the bench next to me, warm and close, hands on my back and head against my shoulder. Sorry, she murmured. Wasn't fast enough to catch you when you went down. Crack, bang, wallop. I'm sorry, Rain, I'm sorry I hurt your girl. Really, I'm sorry, please dash. Hey, you stabbed a dude in the throat for her. You're cool with me, pixie dust. Lozzie giggled. I grunted as Rain gently probed my forehead. I felt for it too, despite her warning, and winced when my questing hand found a bruise the size of an egg. Ow. Looks worse than it is. Rain sighed with relief. Was worried for a minute you'd fractured your skull, but you haven't. Here. Rain rummaged in her jacket pockets and I took a deep breath, forcing it down my raw throat. I struggled to sit up enough to look around, to take in the aftermath of our journey to nowhere. Numb, empty, exhausted, I felt like the living dead. We were in a park, at dawn, next to a dilapidated children's play area, with a couple of sad-looking plastic slides and a rusty climbing frame. A wall for ball games lay half-toppled into the thin grass, fragments of strange symbols still visible on some larger pieces of shattered brick. Orange dawn glow suffused the line of sheltering trees and the distant rooftops beyond. A few spirits went about their unknowable business, waving tentacles and undulating lizard skin, stalking through the trees and clambering over the roofs. None of them paid us the slightest attention. I'd never been so happy to see Sharrowford, or to feel the sun on my face. Twill lay on her back, spread eagle on the grass, scuffed and spattered with other people's blood. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, savoring the air. Evelyn steadied herself against the opposite park bench to the one I was sat on, sagging over her walking stick, but she was smiling with grim satisfaction. Preem stood a few feet away, expressionless and prim and straight-backed despite her battered and bruised look, clothes torn and filthy, and there was only one of her. The second body was gone. She had a young woman restrained in a double arm lock, the zombie conductor cultist from the castle, the scrawny woman Rain had shot at and missed. She was wiry and terrified, watching us all, her face bloodied from a punch, cream-colored robes half twisted off to show jeans and a thin t-shirt beneath. Here, Heather, try to eat some of this, okay? Rain said, as she pressed an unwrapped chocolate bar into my numb hands. Emergency rations, in case you needed to get your jazz on. Good thinking, Evelyn grunted, though she was staring at Lozzie with a curious frown. Hey, I plan for everything. Only thing I'm any good at. Rain allowed herself a little grin and a wink. I managed a tiny nibble of chocolate. Nodded the smallest thank you. Rain crouched down and peered at my eyes, marveling at me. How are you even conscious right now? She asked. Maybe adapting. I croaked. Turning away a bullet required much more complex physics, Evelyn said. This time she just hit somebody. Very hard. We won, I hissed. That we did, Rain said, and her smile lit up my soul. Park, I croaked. Twill puffed out a token laugh. Lozzie giggled and hugged me tighter, cheek pressed against my own. I didn't have the energy or heart to tell her that hurt, and the shared body heat felt nice. Maybe we're not even in Sharrowford, said Twill. Or in England. How screwed up would that be? Evelyn just sighed. You okay? Rain asked me softly. I nodded more with my eyes than with my head, and Rain straightened up, though she kept one firm hand on my shoulder as she produced her mobile phone. Let's ask. Hey Google, where are we? She waited a beat, then raised her eyes at the map on her phone's screen. Oak Grove Park, apparently, almost out of the city, right on the southern edge. Never been down here myself. Home is, she looked up, oriented herself, and pointed over the trees. A long walk that way. That over there, I think that's the old brickworks. And oh, what luck, there's a police station about 5 minutes away. She flashed a smile around. We really want to run into a Bobby on his morning beat right now, yeah? Shit, Twill said, glancing at the still terrified cultist woman in Preem's unyielding grip. What do we do with Surrender Monkey here? Don't dash, the woman stammered, her eyes darting back and forth. Don't kill me. Please. Please don't. You don't want to. Evelyn rounded on the captured cultist, still unsteady on her walking stick. Give me a good reason not to. Making zombies, in my city. I should put you in the ground. I never killed anybody, I never killed anyone. The cultist shook her head, eyes wide. I swear, they just trained me and brought me bodies to work with. I never killed anybody. Lauren? The cultist glanced at Lozzie. Lauren, tell them, I'm not a murderer. Lauren, please please, please. Lozzie looked away. Is she telling the truth? Evelyn asked Lozzie. Lozzie bit her lip, returned Evelyn's sudden scrutiny with upturned eyes. You're Evelyn, right? Yes, that's me. Lozzie turned her head one way and then the other, the picture of a crazy person distracted by a cacophony of thought, or at least, that's how she must have appeared to the others. I saw something quite different. She was glancing at the spirit life in the park, at a pair of canine shapes pacing along the edge of the trees, at squirmy little creatures edging up the children's climbing frame, at a translucent floating squid thing bobbing through the air. More spirits than a minute or two earlier. Lozzie? I croaked. Are these Dash? It's okay, they're my friends. My friends, Lozzie whispered for me, and squeezed me again. Then she spoke up, to Evelyn. I don't care if Flowsy lives or dies, but I don't think she ever killed people. See? You all heard that, right? You all heard that, the cultist said. Flowsy? Rain asked with a smirk. It's not my real name. I should still put you in the ground, Evelyn said. Hello? Twill stood up and spread her arms wide. We're in a park in the suburbs. We gonna leave a corpse here? Yeah, I'll listen to her. I can't kill her, Evie, Rain said. She did surrender. She had zombies left and all, she could have kept fighting, and she let us out. I'm not going to break the Geneva Convention in a Sharrowford park. Evelyn let out a slow sigh. Fine. I still have to do something with her though. We can't just let her go. Fair point. Rain nodded. The cultist woman shuddered as Rain turned to consider her. Yeah, Twill said. Let's just argue about it until a morning jogger comes along, sees 6 girls covered in bruises and blood. Great plan. You have a life. Everyone glanced at me, including the cultist. Do you have a life? I repeated, my voice broken, throat raw, mouth still thick with the taste of blood. I stared at her with exhausted, heavy eyes. I wanted so badly to sleep. She gulped and stammered, glanced around at the others. Don't look at me, Rain told her. The lady of the hour asked you a question, I'd answer if I were you. She's probably your best chance right now. What do you mean? The cultist stammered at me. Other than the cult. A life. The Brotherhood, you mean? Brotherhood? Twill snorted. You're not even a man, dumbass. It's a figure of speech. I will shove this walking stick up your arse, Evelyn grumbled. How's that for a figure of speech? A life? I repeated. No. Not really. She gulped and averted her eyes, sagging in Preem's grip. I don't have anybody important, if that's what you mean. I'm not important. I'm a nobody. Real name? She blinked at me. Mid-20s, older. Mousy and scrawny. A little like myself. Kimberly, she muttered. Job. Home. I work at Poundland, she said very quietly. Rain laughed. The Poundland necromancer. Wow. I love it. Go home. Be normal, I croaked. Make trouble, I'll find you, send you outside. I already killed your boss. You know I can do it to you. Heather. Rain said my name very softly, but I didn't look at her. The cultist no, Kimberly, a young lady with a poorly paid job and little to live for, stared at me from behind bruises and blood. If I'd been more awake, less exhausted, the look in her eyes would have made me shiver. Fear and reverence. She glanced round at all the scary people, Rain and Twill and Evelyn, all people who could kill her, then settled back on me. She nodded. Thank you, she murmured. Thank you. I promise I won't go against you. Evelyn sighed and shrugged. All right. We don't need the whole sob story. One last thing. The big zombie, she didn't stop moving with your other ones. Why? What? I don't understand. Zheng. I croaked, frowning as I realized. The giant zombie woman wasn't here with us. Of course she wasn't. She jumped straight out that hole you made, Lozzie said. Right after my brother. Ah. Thank you. Evelyn nodded somewhat awkwardly at Lozzie, then turned to the cultist again. Why did she do that? The others gave up when you did, but we saw her leaving through the fog, going somewhere else. Were you lying to us? Kimberly shook her head, shaking against Preem's armlock. Zheng's not mine. She's way too much for that, I couldn't make something like her. I should be flattered, but no, we inherited her. Evelyn raised an eyebrow to Lozzie in silent question. Lozzie nodded. She came from my parents. They got her somewhere else. Zheng's real old. High time we let her go, Evie, said Rain. She was busy rearranging her handgun and knife inside her jacket for proper concealment. We are in public now, technically. Twill's right. Evelyn's jaw tightened. I'm still not happy about this. I need insurance. Fine, Rain said, grinning to herself and shaking her head. She stepped away from me and up to the cultist. Kimberly cringed and tried to pull away, to shrink back from Rain, but Preem held her firm. What had she seen Rain do in that castle, to react like that? She started to shake. Hey there, Rain said, still smiling. I don't even have to say it, do I? No, I won't dash. I need your address. Phone number. Whatever you got. Hey, don't worry, I mean you did surrender, right? That was serious, you meant it. Yeah. Yes, I swear. Then we're cool. You and I. We're cool. Unless you want me to have to find your address by myself. Kind of a bother, you know. Kimberly stammered out an address. Rain put it into her phone. Twill crossed her arms and rolled her eyes, muttered psycho under her breath. When it was done, Rain nodded to Evelyn, who sighed again, then tapped Preem on the leg with her walking stick. Preem let the girl drop. Kimberly didn't linger. It probably took every ounce of her courage not to run away from us. She scurried off toward the edge of the park, after stripping off her robe. She balled it up and shoved it into a nearby public bin. She glanced back twice. We watched her go, until she was out of sight. "Dunno about you," said Rain. "But I could murder some breakfast. I think we're all in a fine state to go hit up the aardvark, right?" Evelyn rolled her eyes and Rain relented, grinning. "Okay, serious, it's time to go home and have a bath." "Several baths," I croaked. "Are we actually in the clear?" asked Twill. "Is it over?" Evelyn shrugged at the pile of shattered bricks, the exit point from the cult's exit gateway. "We've wrecked their containment, ruined their fortification, killed all their stockpiled zombies, and Heather apparently blew up their leader. So, maybe. Easier than the first time we killed a mage, right?" Rain cracked a grin. Evelyn shot her a look that could have frozen a lava flow. I opened my mouth. I needed to tell them all about what I'd seen below ground, about the star in the abyss, about the cages and the corpses, but I was too tired to confront all that right now. Heather saw more, Lozzie said. Slowly, gently, after hugging me softly, Lozzie climbed to her feet. I tried to hold on as her hands slipped away. Didn't want her body heat to part from mine. Perhaps I knew, deep down, what she was thinking. With clumsy but heartfelt formality, she bowed her head to all my friends. Thank you, for coming for me." Rain lit up with the kind of smile she usually reserved for me, and to my surprise she reached out and ruffled Lozzie's filthy hair. "'S what I do. Any friend of Heather's is a friend of mine." Lozzie beamed back at her. Evelyn grunted. "Yes, certainly. This has been quite the enigma." "Heather?" I made a grumbling noise in my throat. Evelyn didn't seriously expect me to explain all this right now, did she? She fixed me with a pinched frown, then seemed to get the message, shrugging to herself. "Hold up a sec," Twill said. "Who exactly the hell is this?" "I'm Lozzie." "Hi." She beamed at Twill. "You're the werewolf, right? That's so cool." "Oh, thanks." Twill couldn't keep a smirk off her face. "Long story," I mumbled. "Yeah, I figured," said Twill. "One I think we all need to hear," Evelyn said, her voice a little tighter than I could deal with right now. "At home, not here in a bloody park." Lozzie was glancing back and forth between Rain, myself and the others, her mouth hanging open a little, eyes still heavy-lidded but widened in some private realization. Evelyn noticed, nodded toward her. "She doesn't have anywhere to go." "Does she?" "Sure she does," Rain countered, smiling at Lozzie. "You're coming with us, no question about it. You are 500% welcome. Right, Evie?" Evelyn rolled her eyes. "Right." Lozzie stepped away from the bench and onto the grass, leaving petite little footprints in the morning dew. She turned, looked over all of us, chewing on her lower lip and then gnawing on a ragged fingernail. Oh, I didn't think. What's wrong?" I managed. She scampered back to me and threw her arms around my shoulders. She hugged me tight enough to hurt a little, and I did my best to return the embrace, my arms still weak and shaky. Lozzie sniffed into my shoulder, and I realized she was holding back tears. She pulled away and planted a quick, hesitant kiss on my cheek. Not a romantic kiss, nothing erotic about it at all. A fleeting touch of intimacy. "I have to go," she said. "What? Aren't you coming with me, Heather?" I heard the catch in her throat. She tried to smile but only got halfway there, a strange melancholy fighting with her natural twitchy energy. Slowly, dull and half-dead, I shook my head, wishing I didn't understand. But I knew exactly what she meant, all too well. She slid out of my arms, stood up and stepped back, still trying to smile. She curled her bare toes into the grass. I have to go, she repeated louder, then took a deep breath and smiled up at the sky. I think. Yeah, I think I do need to. You killed my brother, and thank you, Heather. Thank you, all of you. I'm free now. Thank you. She sniffed and wiped brimming tears on the back of her hand, and looked round as the spirit life began to approach her. Lozzie smiled at the warped hound things which padded out of the tree line, trotting across the grass to sit at her heels. She held out a hand to the half-dozen squirming, wriggling bundles of chitin and claw that scaled her pajama legs and up her back to perch on her shoulders. She turned to welcome the bobbing jellyfish crowding around her head. She murmured soft little words to them all, but the picture was incomplete without the goat skull mask over her face. The others glanced between her and I, by turns confused or tense, because of course they couldn't see what I was seeing. Twill pulled a face like this was crazy, but I think Evelyn and Rain had some idea what was happening. Go. Where? Evelyn asked, frowning sharply. Yeah, hey, what's going on here? Twill asked. You mean outside, don't you? Said Rain. Lozzie and I both nodded. Beyond. Lozzie lit up with this huge beaming smile which failed to cover the sadness beneath. Are you sure you don't want to come? Heather? I opened my mouth and couldn't answer. No, of course I didn't want to, but deep down inside, I understood the desire. After so many dreams together, so many wondrous places, I got it. Why? Why not stay here? Evelyn asked. I saw her fingering the carved thigh bone in one hand. Rain tilted her chin, waiting patiently. Because I'm not really meant to be here, Lozzie said. She took a deep breath, filled her lungs as she looked up and around, at the beautiful morning glow breaking over Sharrowford. Her long, shuddering sigh and the melancholy of her forced smile cut me right to the quick, even through the exhaustion. It's so lovely, it really is, but I'm like a deep-sea fish too close to the surface. No. Lozzie, no, I managed to croak at her. She looked at me, then around at the others again, and I could feel her wavering. Besides, she shrugged. My uncle will be after me now. I couldn't bear to be caged again. I need to fly. Uncle? Evelyn growled softly. Lozzie nodded, distracted by the spirits clustered to her, her idle hand trailing down to rub the head of one of the nightmare hounds at her feet. The rest of the Brotherhood will go to him now, probably. The followers, you know. He probably took control of Zheng, too, that's why she couldn't follow me. She swallowed, shook her head gently, holding back tears. There's another mage? Evelyn asked through gritted teeth. Evie, I managed, waving a mute hand at her to shut up. Lozzie blinked at her. Kind of. He's not like my brother. My brother was the brains but my uncle was the organizer. He always found the recruits, the bodies, the kids, she whispered, then tried to smile. He'll be after me now, and he's already seen all of you once, when he tracked Maisie's messenger. If I stay here. I opened my mouth to say a dozen different things. Where can I find him? Evelyn said, hard and cold. Ah. Lozzie blinked. You've all seen him before. In that parking garage. She turned her head to pay attention to another little spirit on her shoulder, a cross between a squirrel and a bat, tiny teeth bared as she tweaked its nose. Evie, Rain said softly. Where is he? Evelyn demanded. Is he in Sharrowford? I don't know. I think so. His name's Edward, a Lilbun like me. He never cared about my brother's stupid project. Lozzie shrugged. He's good at finding things, finding people, but now I can go to places he can't follow. Tell him the truth, when he finds you. He'll leave you alone. She was trying to convince herself. I could hear the struggle in her voice. I suspected all this stuff about her uncle was mere justification. Part of her wanted to go, part of her wanted to stay. Two natures in one body. We can protect you, Rain said, not missing a beat. Take a moment, look at us or hell, just at me. It's what I do. Like I said, any friend of Heather's is a friend of mine. Damn straight, said Rain. Evelyn grunted. But Lozzie shook her head. She backed up another step across the damp grass, forcing herself away from us with the spirits trailing in her wake. Thank you. I know. I know you could. But I still have to go. I don't belong here. She pulled a weak smile, then seemed to hesitate for a moment. Only just found you, I whispered. Lozzie met my eyes and lit up, a real smile, with a spark of joy underneath. She raised her arms to encompass the whole world, sending spirits scattering and scampering. Heather, I can help you now. I can go everywhere. Anywhere. You helped me, you freed me, and now I'm going to help you and Maisie. I shook my head. But I want to, she continued. There's places I can go that you don't even know about, Heather, places in the beyond. Outside. Places I can't take anybody else, not even Zheng, because I'm not really human anymore, you know. I haven't been since that thing used my head as a life raft. There's things I can talk to, questions I can ask, help I can enlist, for you. Please. Please Heather, please let me help. If I'd been whole and well rested, I would have stopped her, stood up and grabbed her and held on tight. Lozzie was a very special kind of friend, and I didn't want her to go alone into dark places. But in that moment, listening to all her justifications and reasons and excuses to leave humanity behind and go outside, through my exhaustion and the echoing pain and the melancholy of her leaving so soon, I saw a vision of myself. Was I going to end up like that? Torn between being human and not. She took my hesitation for agreement. How like her brother, in some ways. Oh, Heather. Her face fell and she shook off her retinue of spirits to run back and hug me one more time. She clung on hard and buried her face in my shoulder. It's not like I'm leaving forever or something. Just until it's safe, until I can help you. I'll be back, I'll come back to visit, I promise. Sooner than you think. I nodded. Hated myself for it, but I nodded. Lozzie stood up and danced back into her little crowd of spirits. She turned to us and bowed her head. Thank you. Stay one day, at least, Rain said. You need a bath, a change of clothes. Have dinner with us. Come on, one day won't hurt. I don't need any of those things, Lozzie said, an odd smile on her face, refilled with that twitchy energy. Twill was just completely lost for words, but to my incredible surprise, Preem had turned to watch as well. She'd bowed her head every so slightly in response to Lozzie's gesture. I don't think anybody else noticed, and I only saw it because I was so numb. We'll kill your uncle too, Evelyn said. Please don't get hurt. I couldn't bear it if he hurt any of you. Please, please. I'm the one that does the hurting round here, Rain said. She shot Lozzie a wink. We'll be fine. You change your mind in 5 minutes, tomorrow, next week, you know where to find us. Spirit life climbed back onto Lozzie's shoulders, crowded around her legs, touching her with 24 pseudopods and feelers and claws and muzzles. She waved to us. Bye-bye for now. See you later. See you, I managed. And then, she simply wasn't there. The spirits vanished with her. Outside. All she left was footprints. I was too numb to cry. The others stared at the empty space where Lozzie had vanished, at her footprints in the cold morning dew. Lozzie's departure hurt, yes, I'd always been useless at making friends, and now I'd made one literally in my sleep. But Lozzie had better things to do than spend time with me. Things I didn't want to imagine. Outside things. That cut me far deeper. Had I seen a vision of my own future, if I kept staring into the abyss? Too exhausted and numb to face any of that right now, so I just closed my eyes. Apricot colors of dawn glowed through my closed eyelids, transforming to burnt yellow as clouds veiled the sun. Fingers of crisp cold air brushed my face. Distant sounds of birdsong and the waking city lulled me over the border of sleep for a second or two. One of my friends spoke softly. I was safe now, drained completely, shutting down. I'm sure she'll be fine, Heather. I forced my eyes open again. Rain sported a rare smile, for her pained sympathy lurking beneath the confidence, at a loss, a nothing-can-be-done sort of smile. She always knew how I felt, even when I was too tired to feel it myself. She seemed like a lot of fun, if you stay on her good side. Hope she comes back to visit soon. The tone in Rain's voice, that shining certainty, almost made me believe it. Sure. Outside, I grunted. Outside? Outside what? Reality, Evelyn said with a sigh. No need to swear, I grumbled, then let my heavy eyelids close once more. Somebody let out a huge sigh. Somebody else flapped their arms. My body ached for sleep, and I didn't care that I was on park bench, covered with my own blood and vomit. Right then, ladies and demons, Rain said, if there's no last-minute objections, I'm going to call a taxi. Twill snorted. Yeah, and the driver'll call the police the moment he sees us. We look like we've been in a slaughterhouse. You have a better proposal? Evelyn grumbled. Heather's not walking home in her state. A long pause, then a frustrated huff. All right, and neither am I. I'm in pain, yes. Happy? Well, no, course not. I could carry you. I didn't hear Evelyn's response, but I didn't need to, the silence spoke volumes. Plus, Twill went on, what about your Denied the peace of sleep, I opened my eyes again. Twill was thumbing over her shoulder at Preem. What about her? Evelyn asked. She's blue. How you have her walking around in public, I don't dash. Do I have to explain basic concepts to you? Evelyn snapped. She frowned at Twill from beneath furrowed brow. Nobody sees that unless they're expecting it. She's completely fine, she dash. Doesn't look so blue to me, I croaked. Stopped short, Evelyn blinked several times. What on earth are you talking about? I shrugged my shoulders, or tried to. Seemed obvious. Evelyn's magical servant, the demon from outside possessing a wooden mannequin, her perfect expressionless face and bloodless wounds, her scuffed clothes, had won some color. Several hours ago her skin had been like pale ice, but now she had lightened, as if flushed with heat and life underneath the surface. Preem's not blue anymore, I mumbled. Preem turned her face toward me at the sound of her name, the name I'd given her. She merely stared at me. Demons riding dolls or corpses seem to do a lot of that, I noted. Thanks for helping, I managed. Evelyn peered at Preem with a dark frown. With the panic and chaos of the last few hours, perhaps she'd only noticed the change when I pointed it out. Trust me, Rain was saying. We're miles from the worst a Sharrowford taxi driver's seen. We'll be nice and quiet and polite, nobody has to freak out, and I'll tip a 50. We stay here any longer and we really are gonna run into somebody. Twill shrugged. I guess, whatever. I'm still gonna walk though, I feel fine now. You not coming back to the house with us? Twill stalled for a second, then puffed out a big sigh. Nah. She flexed her right hand, looking down at the mended bones, then swallowed and glanced at Rain and me with obvious discomfort in her eyes. I should go tell my mom about all this. Family needs to know, You sure? Rain asked. You alright doing that? Twill shrugged. Been a busy day. I should go home. Evelyn turned that dark frown away from Preem and hit Twill with the full force of her glare. If your mother or the thing riding along in her head gives you the slightest bit of trouble about what happened yesterday, then you can bloody well tell her that Evelyn stalled out, mouth half open. She took a second to gather herself and looked away. That I've always got a spare room for you. She glanced back at Twill, frowning up a storm. Understand? Ah, Evelyn. Evelyn could not match werewolf speed. Twill pulled her into a heartfelt hug, though Evelyn did her best to resist. Get off me, you mongrel. Twill laughed and let her go, darting away to avoid the rap of Evelyn's walking stick against her ankles. You didn't mean that. Don't push your luck, Evelyn snapped. Twill grinned. You love me really. I love all of you, I said before I realized I was speaking. Perhaps it was the exhaustion talking. Recovery was ghastly. To kill Alexander Lilban, I'd pushed my grasp of hyperdimensional mathematics right to the limit, and this time the aftermath lacked the merciful unconsciousness of a fugue state. Still, after we got home that morning and got clean, though Rain had to hold me upright in the shower, I slept for 15 hours straight. Lethargy and the ghost of nausea haunted me for a full week, along with the chronic pain of stubborn headaches, fluttering tremors inside my chest, stomach cramps, and muscle weakness. Rain encouraged me to dip into Evelyn's private stash of painkillers, and I did, more than once. The hard stuff, the codeine and others, provided at least some relief. Evelyn and Rain had a hushed argument about drug dependency when they thought I was out of earshot, and about how to find me some cannabis on the university campus, though Rain knew I would never take that. I caught myself staring into space or at the kitchen tabletop for minutes on end, or trailing off in mid-sentence until Rain said my name, my mind defragmenting itself after too much intimacy with the mathematical truth of reality. I shuffled around that creaking old house like a real zombie. Once I blanked out on the toilet for almost 15 minutes. On the fifth day Rain had a bright idea. She stuck a favorite book in front of my nose, Watership Down, and forced me to read it to her out loud. She sat and listened for as long as I needed, until mechanical repetition of words shaded with the delight of the story, and of sharing it with her. That seemed to do the trick. By the end of the week I was uncomfortably well reminded that I had an end-of-term essay due soon, on either King Lear or Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. I chose Lear, popped more painkillers, and did my best to focus. Stubborn old men and bloody intrigue I could deal with. Imaginary realms full of sucking fog and personifications of death, not so much right now. I told Rain and Evelyn everything, of course. About Lozzie, about the dreams I'd been having and forgetting for weeks, about what I saw underground in the cult's castle, the corpses, and the bound god in the abyss. Evelyn didn't seem surprised about the sacrifices. She'd seen that sort of thing before, I suppose, from the sharp end. I explained what happened in the throne room, what Alexander and I had discussed, but I couldn't express why I'd needed to prove him wrong. It touched too closely on the wound of Lozzie's departure, on why I'd needed to remain myself. Don't tell me you feel guilty about it? Evelyn had asked, frowning at me over the kitchen table. No. Not guilty, just, I'd shaken my head, hesitated over what to say. Of course she doesn't, Rain answered for me, rubbing my shoulders from behind. Pure self-defense, right? It was you or him, when it came down to it. You absolutely did the right thing, Heather. And hey, if you hadn't done for him, I would have shot him in the mug about 20 seconds later, so in a sort of way you never really had a choice. Think about it like that, if it helps. Killing him was the only solution, Evelyn had grumbled, waving a dismissive hand. Too far gone, a mage like that. Left him alone and he'd have come for us sooner or later. It wasn't self-defense, and it wasn't about removing a threat, not to me. I withered inside under Rain's emotional support and Evelyn's practical justifications. Rain had rescued my notebook of hyperdimensional mathematics, scooped it up from the floor of the throne room at the last minute, after she'd pulled my unconscious body onto her back. When she returned it to me I almost couldn't accept the thing, half hateful, half a source of strength, but it was merely a symbol of what I carried in my head. Here was the instrument by which I might save my sister, here was the abyss in which I might lose myself. When I was no longer quite so exhausted, Rain and I spent a quiet few hours refreshing the fractal on my left arm, watching cartoons together. I relished the alone time, the attention, the slow intimate touch of her hands, and especially the part when she made me put my head in her lap, but there was a distance between us now, a barrier. Lozzie dominated my thoughts. She felt like a dirty secret I'd kept from Rain. How responsible was I, for the convenient amnesia after every shared dream? Even the real Lozzie, bruised and dirty and twitchy, possessed an undeniable elfin beauty. I didn't think I was attracted to her, she wasn't my type, but how much had that beauty, that intimacy, influenced me? My secret bit on the side made me sick. One night that week I woke from a dream about her. We'd been building a sandcastle together, an elaborate citadel of crumbling spires and collapsing gatehouses, and had watched hand in hand as the sea rolled in to lay siege to our work. I'd woken with tears on the pillow, and realized she hadn't visited me. Just a normal dream. Rain wanted to know everything about her, in total innocence she just wanted to know about my friend. And I couldn't explain what it had felt like to see Lozzie for real, those minutes together underground, the need to hug her and know she was real. A weird, twisted little part of myself wanted Rain to be jealous, wanted her to suspect the worst of me, wanted her to claim me as hers all over again to absolve me. Instead, she'd never been so attentive. Bringing me food, coaxing me to sleep, massaging away the aches and pains. She helped me with the end-of-term essay, listened to my woefully pedestrian undergraduate ideas, encouraged me and told me I was getting better. She was so gentle with me, too gentle, but I didn't have the words to tell her what I needed. Stupid, selfish Heather. So focused on myself, I didn't spare a thought for what was going on in Rain's head, for why she followed me everywhere, why she needed me to fall asleep before she could, why sometimes I found her sat up listening to the sounds of the night. Autumn guttered, blew out, and winter cold descended. Tenny didn't seem to feel the chill or the rain. I went to see her a couple of times in the overgrown back garden, with Rain by my side. She didn't respond to questions about Lozzie, didn't seem to be much perturbed by our brief absence, too busy exploring and probing with her tentacles, waving the slowly regrowing stubs at me. I watched her capture a vole or a shrew, hold it immobile on the ground, turn the terrified thing over and over in her tentacles, before gently letting it go again. Her presence had driven off most of the other spirit life around the garden and the patch of street immediately in front of the house. Her territory now. The cult really was gone. I began to suspect Lozzie's mysterious uncle didn't exist. Evelyn had repaired Preem and sent her into the city every day, investigating the cult's little pocket dimensions and loops and hidden passages, but they were all collapsing like shrinking cysts, vanishing into whatever layer of reality they'd been carved from. The main pocket remained the wound around the cult's captured god, but in Evelyn's delightful metaphor it had gone native. Not a place for unprotected human beings anymore. Evelyn asked very little about Lozzie. I failed to realize how little she was talking to me. Chalked it up to her focus on Preem's odd changes. I should have noticed the warning signs. Twill came round to visit once, not for any special reason. That brightened the day. Not because of the silly werewolf herself, but for Evelyn's reaction, the surface bristling which I suspect even Twill herself was beginning to find rather transparent. I tried not to think too much. I reread King Lear and added to my essay, went to the library with Rain to look up reference books. She encouraged that. It got me out of the house, got fresh air in my lungs, worked the weakness out of my legs, occupied my mind with something I loved. Wrapped up in my coat and that beautiful pink hoodie she'd bought me, scarf around my neck against the cold, she never let me go alone. Things were returning to normal, whatever normal meant anymore. How could I read books and walk around, eat breakfast and pretend everything was normal, after a night spent in a pocket dimension full of zombies and monsters and atrocities, after killing a wizard with my mind? What else could I do? I didn't want to fail a class, so I worked. It was that or curl up in bed and never leave. Once, I would have thought that a real option. I knew in a few weeks I'd have to tackle the brain math again, think about Lozzie, take charge and sit my friends down and talk about the plan. But for now, I needed to rest. Of course, if you knew anything about me, you knew the library was the most likely place to find me, other than at home. So that's where they found me. A quiet corner desk on the third floor of Sharrowford University Library, flanked on one side by a pitted concrete support column and the open vista of windows looking over the back of campus. The gentle rustle and soft footsteps of the library at mid-morning. Buzzing strip lights compensating for the overcast gloom. One of my favorite spots. Rain was nearby, maybe 15 or 20 feet away, off somewhere between the library stacks. She was looking for a book she needed for her own university work. I wasn't paying attention. She'd come get me if she needed to go much further away. I had 2 books open on the desk in front of me, reading Leir and a literary journal with a fascinating essay called Dragon Fathers and Unnatural Children. I was turning a page of the latter, mentally drafting the conclusion to my essay, when I happened to glance up. Why? I think it called me, lurking in my peripheral vision. A tiny goat statue on the opposite side of the desk. A hateful little thing with a twisted satyr face, looking at me with pewter eyes. Hadn't been there when I'd sat down. To my credit, I didn't freeze up. My heart leapt into my throat, but I turned, about to call out for Rain, her name on my lips, but I stalled for half a second, damned by library etiquette. Had I ever raised my voice in a library? Surely not. Oh dear. In that half second, a person cleared their throat, right behind me. Well, yes, then I froze up. A woman stepped into my field of vision, at arm's length from me, old raincoat over an athletic top, layers failing to conceal the flow of wiry muscle beneath. Cheap tattoos peeked out from her neckline and on her exposed wrists. She picked up the goat statue from the table with her good left arm. Her right was encased in a plain white orthopedic cast with the hand left free, her raincoat's arm hanging slack because she couldn't get the cast through the sleeve. A shaved head nodded a greeting to me, and I met the cold, flint-hard eyes of Amy Stack, the Sharrowford cult skinhead assassin. "All right," she murmured, "at proper library volume." I hiccuped. My eyes flickered toward where I thought Rain was standing. Couldn't see her, she was on the other side of the library shelves, visible only as the corner of a leather jacket. "Relax," Stack said. "I'm not here for a fight." I felt like a mouse in front of a snake. Frozen solid but vibrating inside, preparing to launch myself from my chair and scramble away. Would I make it? Should I shout for Rain? I was still weak, stuffed with painkillers, and Stack radiated that slow potential for violence, that economy of movement so similar to Rain, that wound spring effect in every muscle. "How dare you?" I hissed, and surprised myself. "This is a library. I am trying to work." She blinked at me, once. Point scored. My anger surprised me. I'd clung to essay writing and literary theory this last week because it was solid, it was certain, it was something I'm good at, something not magical or full of monsters or so dumb it shouldn't exist. "Caught you at a bad time?" she asked. "Quite. And you are not a student. Do you even have a library card?" "No, I don't." "Then you're not supposed to be in here." A tremor in my voice. Chest constricted, palms sweaty. Stack stared at me like I was the idiot. Then she nodded very slightly. "Fair enough. I won't come back again. See that you don't. We need to talk. You here alone?" I shook my head. "That's good. Call your friends then." She inclined her head. "Say. No, Rain." A slight frown. "Who's that?" "The woman you tried to shoot." Oh, how I relished those words. I wish they'd had more effect on her. She raised her eyebrows in mild interest. "Call her then." Rain, I said at normal volume, broke the most cherished library rule. Then I hiccuped again. Rain heard it in the way I said her name. She was round the end of the shelves in 2 strides, her eyes taking in Stack and myself and the distance between us with a single glance. One hand slid inside her jacket before Stack could open her mouth. Not here. I hissed. Not in the library. Rain paused, eyes glued to Stack, and tilted her head in silent question. Stack stared back at her, eyebrows raised, unconcerned, or at least pretending unconcern. Like watching a pair of tigers sizing each other up. Even now, flushed with adrenaline, part of me filed away that look on Rain's face, in the sort of mental folder one only opens in private. I wanted her to look at me like that. Slowly, carefully, each movement wide and exaggerated, Stack turned out her pockets to show they were empty, rolled up her right sleeve, and lifted the hem of her top to reveal her empty waistband, turning once to prove she had nothing tucked into the back. Then she nudged the opposite chair away from the desk, and sat down, staring at Rain the whole time. Just here to talk. Rain watched her a second longer, then crossed to me, touched my shoulder, and asked a silent question with her eyes. I nodded and swallowed, and Rain dragged over a chair from the desk behind us. She placed it forward of me, between Stack and I, then adjusted it again, forward by another couple of inches. She sat down very slowly. Posturing. I would have rolled my eyes at any other time, but right now she was perfect. Stack watched Rain with strange interest. You're like me, aren't you? Eat me, Baldy, Rain said in a soft murmur. Let's get something real clear, just between me and you. Forget her for a sec, Rain gestured at me. I'm not like you at all. Stack raised her eyebrows. Is that what you think? You're in denial. See, you've got it all turned around. It's not that I'm like you. That's a fundamental misunderstanding, a category error. Rain broke into a grin. Not the sort of grin she used on me. A different type, one that made my skin crawl. The similarity between you and I, that's because you're a very, very, very little bit like me. Stack nodded slowly. Interesting theory. Rain just grinned wider. Stack shrugged her shoulders. Only here to talk, she said. Yeah, asked Rain. So who are we talking to? You. My boss. I punted your boss through a wall, I managed, and felt much better for saying it, though I followed the words with a loud hiccup when Stack stared at me. I made a point of nodding at the cast on her left arm. I broke all of his bones, instead of just one. New boss, same as the old boss, Stack said. I didn't have a comeback to that, and Rain just stared her down amazingly. It worked. After a moment, Stack let out a sigh and looked out the window. Yeah, there's been some restructuring. You know, change of management. Change of goals. I work for a slightly different person now. Edward Lilburn, Rain said, grinning as Stack turned to look at her. I'm right, aren't I? Amy shrugged. He doesn't want to meet you. He's a coward. Really now? Rain raised her eyebrows. Yeah. Funny way to talk about your boss. They stared at each other again, and this time I really did roll my eyes. Amy, can I call you Amy? What does your boss want? Couple of things, she said, taking a deep breath and leaning back. First one's for you. Where's Lauren? She's gone outside. Amy's eyes scrunched up in this weird tight quirk, like she hadn't quite heard me right. A pinch of a frown, a little disbelief, almost a touch of fear, if she hadn't been incapable of feeling that emotion. Pardon, she murmured. She left, I said. Buggered right off, Rain added. All right. Second question's for Evelyn say. Wanna call her here? Rain snorted a humorless laugh. If you want her to torture you to death, sure. She'll do it. She's crazy, our Evie. Better pray you don't bump into her. Fine. Can we coexist? Rain and I actually shared a glance. I shrugged. Rain straightened up and sat back, let out a long theatrical sigh and stroked her chin. It was quite the performance, but it was wasted on Amy Stack as an audience. Not really up to me, that one, said Rain. I'm not the one in charge here. Where's Zheng? I blurted out. Amy turned her slow regard on me. Yeah, Heather's more in charge than I am, Rain murmured. You want to make a deal, might be best to do it with her. She can bite your head off, you know. The zombie's done a runner, Stack said. Not a peep. Are you lying? I asked. Stack shrugged, wide and eloquent. Doesn't make any difference to you either way. This next part is between me and you, all right? She looked at Rain, then back at me. Or between me and Say, take it however you like. My new boss probably isn't going to mess with you. He's scared shitless of Say, and terrified of you, Miss Morel, right? Not Lavinia. Yes. I'll thank you not to use my middle name, please. She nodded. He won't even risk a phone call via my cell, in case you or Say do something with sound, fry his brain or whatever. I don't pretend to understand half of it, playing with fire if you ask me. He doesn't really expect me to return from this little meeting. Oh, I think we could prove him right on that count, Rain said. I think otherwise, Amy said gently. You can even follow me when I leave here, but I've got instructions not to meet up with the rest of them, not for the next 3 weeks, and not in Sharrowford city limits. They're too afraid. You broke M. So, I think we can all coexist. Get me? They. I echoed. Aren't you one of them? Amy shrugged. You kept well out of that whole castle thing, didn't you? Rain murmured. Only been there once. I'm no idiot. Oh. No. Could a fooled me. Still alive, aren't I? Point, Rain said. I don't think we can coexist, I said very quietly, dredging up that core of conviction I'd felt in the castle, during those slow, numb minutes underground. Edward Lilburn, Lozzie's uncle, he was responsible, for what was in the castle, wasn't he? Stack raised her eyebrows. I just stared at her no small feet, looking back into those stone-hard eyes. My heart fluttered and my stomach tightened, but I held her gaze. Eventually she sighed and nodded. Saw pity, she said. Here's what's gonna happen, said Rain, and scooted her chair even closer to Stack. You come against us again and I'll kill you. Obviously. No, I don't mean I'll fight you and win, or stab you to death or something. I owe you. Shooting at me, I can forgive that. Kidnapping my girl, that's different. I'll find where you sleep, or who your family are, or maybe you have a kid. Stack actually smiled, and a little puff of laughter escaped her. You can try. Or maybe you don't care about anything except yourself. Rain spread her hands. I can work with that too. I'm sure you can. Slowly, making no sudden movements, Stack got out of the chair and stood up. She nodded once to me, and once to Rain. Sit and swivel, slap head, Rain said. Same to you. She stepped away from the table, and without looking back, stalked off between the library shelves, light-footed despite the boots on her feet. Rain and I watched her go. I didn't breathe again until she vanished toward the stairwell, behind too many books. Are you going after her? I asked, swallowing on a very dry mouth. Nah, it's pointless. She wasn't lying. Rain sighed and looked at me. Oh, Heather, hey, it's fine, we're fine. She leaned over and wrapped her arms around me. I was shaking very badly, my breathing unsteady. My heart was hammering at 100 miles an hour. I'm okay, yes, I'm okay, I lied, then hiccuped. That was kind of scary. Yeah. Yeah, it was. Rain rubbed my back and held on for a while, then let me go so I could gather up my dignity. I concentrated on closing the book I'd been reading, and on placing both my hands flat on the tabletop to stop the shaking. Rain reached over and squeezed one of them. "We need to tell Evie about this," I said. What do we do now?" "I thought that was the end of them," I thought. "How much of that essay you got left?" "I am sorry, what?" "Rain." She looked right at me and repeated the question, completely unshaken, as if this was exactly the right thing to talk about after a brush with an assassin. I just shook my head. "Serious question. How much work you got left before you can turn it in?" I don't know. Maybe 4 more paragraphs. And then I need to move a few parts around before I proofread it. I'm not happy with the beginning. First draft isn't the only draft." "Rain." I tooted. "What are you getting at?" "It's almost Christmas break. I think we should get out of Sharrowford for a bit, the 3 of us. Well, 4 of us if you count Preem, I suppose. Can't leave her here all by herself, no knowing what a demon riding around in a sex toy will get up to by her lonesome." Rain lit up, beaming that endless confidence right into my brain. I shook my head, stunned. "We'll go down south, go see where Evie grew up," she said. "Trust me, you'll love the place." We'd been southbound on the M1 for about an hour when I nodded off in the back of Rain's car. She let me sleep until we stopped at a service station on the outskirts of Leicester. Evelyn got out to stretch her muscles in the early December cold and glare at the world. Climbing in and out of the car wasn't the easiest thing for her. We all bought terrible petrol station sandwiches and a huge bag of cheese and onion crisps to share. Preem stayed in her seat with her hands folded in her lap, though when we squeezed back into Rain's beaten-up old car and pulled back onto the road, the doll demon turned her head to stare at the passing farmland and skeletal winter trees. There wasn't much else to see on the motorway, the endless asphalt ribbon carrying us out of the north. I wondered if Preem saw what I did, the pneumosomatic spirit life infesting every nook and cranny, tentacled masses of flesh dragging themselves along underneath the concrete overpasses, leering wolf things loping down the hard shoulder, towering giants cresting the horizon between the towns and villages. At one point a moth as big as a bear alighted on the roof of the car in front of us. It watched the sky for a second, antenna twitching, then took off again in a blur of wings. "Look at that lad, that is a hell of a car. Wonder how much all those mods cost him. Absolute beast." "Hey, there's a slogan etched on the back window, what does that say?" "Heather, you've got the best eyes here, can you read that from back there?" "The Pie Wagon, it says." Rain burst out laughing. She slapped the steering wheel. She'd kept up a heroic one-woman effort at conversation while she drove, and I did my best to help, but Evelyn brooded in dark silence. She'd spoken less than a dozen words all day. At first it had all seemed an adventure, as we'd taken the winding route out of Sharrowford's warren of streets that morning, and the grey rotting city had receded in the rear-view mirror when we hit the motorway. This was the kind of adventure that university students were meant to have, a road trip in a rickety but reliable old car, a few changes of clothes in the boot, and the company of real friends. Stiff legs from sitting too long, cold hands tucked up into my sleeves, on a journey together that was neither dangerous nor suicidal. Normal. Explicable. Safe. I didn't understand the first thing about cars, but even I could tell that 270,000 miles on the clock was rather high, even for what Rain had affectionately called an old banger. But her driving made me feel perfectly safe. She was defensive, deliberate, decisive. If Rain said it was safe, it was safe. Safe, yes. Rain was making me feel a lot of that, this last week. And not much else. I tried not to think about what that might mean. Long car journeys were all bad childhood memories for me. Trips to or from the mental hospital, rocking and crying to myself at the things I'd seen following the car. Between hallucinations and blackouts my parents had quite understandably vetoed me learning to drive. My father had driven me up to Sharrowford at the beginning of Freshers' Week in August, the start of term, and spent a whole day checking out the university with me, making sure I was settled in, that I wasn't on the verge of a relapse. Cars were just another extension of the medicalization of my life. Except this trip. This was a road trip with my smoking hot girlfriend, our rich best friend with a family home in the country, and a demon possessing a dubious internet-bought sex doll. At least, that's what I reminded myself, while the car filled with the tension of Evelyn's black mood and my inexpressible sexual frustration. Evelyn had stewed in her foul temper for days, ever since Rain and I had returned from the unexpected confrontation with Amy Stack. "You did say you'd think about it," Rain had said to her, lounging in a chair by the kitchen table. "And we both know you need some real downtime, as much as Heather does. You've been running yourself ragged for weeks now, and yeah, guilty as charged, I'm sort of responsible for letting you do that. Heather won't let me live it down if I don't stage an intervention sooner or later." She glanced over at me with a grin. "Right? I promise, 100% I won't hold it against you if you disagree. Don't you think we all need 5 minutes out? We should get out of the city, just for a few days." I was lingering by the doorway, caught between the desire to support my girlfriend and an urge to flee the threatening storm clouds on Evelyn's face. I was still frazzled after the ambush in the library, my mind still on Stack and Alexander, on giant zombies and my missing friend, my Lozzie. Hadn't quite adjusted yet to the implications of visiting Evelyn's family home down in Sussex. Evelyn glared from behind a thin barricade of dirty mugs. I believe she was dreaming up ways to murder Rain. Hunched down in her seat, glowering silently, she reminded me of a crocodile lurking beneath the water. "I'm not so sure," I said eventually, tried to put some steel into my voice. "What if Lozzie tries to contact me, or comes to visit? She won't know where I am." Rain paused and nodded. She took me seriously, but Evelyn rolled her eyes in a moment of incredulity, one that would needle me for days before I admitted it. "She can find you in dreams, can't she?" Rain asked. "I guess she can. She hadn't so far. Not so much as a peep. We could leave a letter for her as well, right here." Rain patted the tabletop, then caught Evelyn's glare again. "Loosen your grip for 5 minutes, Evie, I'm serious. Come on, we won." "We had won," Evelyn corrected with a snap. "Until you two were accosted by an assassin in the bloody library." "Hey, she's only an assassin when she's doing the assassinating. Today she was a messenger. A crap one at that. From another mage, in my city." "Apparently not in the city," like I said. Rain spread her hands and smiled. "That's good news, right? You never cease to amaze me. Your stupidity is matched only by your credulousness." Rain shook her head and laughed without humor. I risked Evelyn's ire by clearing my throat, forced myself to speak when she turned that glare my way. She seemed equally as irritated, no special softening for me. "I think I agree with what Rain said earlier." "My condolences to your brain cells," she grunted. "Evelyn." I put some gentle scold into my voice. She looked down at her lap with a long-suffering sigh. "My leg hurts," she muttered, scooted her chair back, pulled up her skirt to the middle of her thigh, and set about removing her prosthetic leg in full view. I blinked, taken aback for a moment, unsure if this was a passive-aggressive gesture or if she really was in pain. "Evie, hey," Rain said, leaning forward, apparently unperturbed by the sight of Evelyn rolling the rubber socket down her thigh, and wiggling her stump out of the black prosthetic knee. "I know why you don't want to go visit home, and dash. Do you?" Evelyn snapped without looking up. "Do you really? You two need to stop. Both of you," I said. "Maybe we can all take a step back but Rain raised a finger toward me and I trailed off. She stared at Evelyn. I shut my mouth, frowning and fuming in silent protest. What was Rain pushing for here? The silence stretched out as Evelyn massaged the muscles in her truncated thigh. I thought of a dozen excuses to leave the room. An explosion was brewing. Eventually, Evelyn glanced sidelong at Rain. "Yeah, I think I do know why," Rain said very softly. "Oh yes," Evelyn snapped back. "Because my father is just going to love seeing you at the house, isn't he?" "'S not about me," Rain said, just as softly. How she kept her cool in front of that razor tongue, I don't know. Evelyn glared for a moment longer, then she finally broke, a hard swallow making her throat bob. "Hey, it'll be fine, I promise," Rain said, that beaming smile slowly breaking across her face. It didn't seem to work on Evelyn. "We scoured that house from top to bottom, you know it's probably the safest place in the whole country dash." "Safety there is not the issue," Evelyn growled. "And Heather and I are gonna be with you the entire time," Rain continued. "It's not like you'll be by yourself, I'd never make you do that, I'd never even suggest it. I wouldn't let you even if you wanted to. All three of us, together. Take Preem too, for insurance, or if you need a bed warmer. It'll be fun, and we don't have to linger there for long. We can swing by Heather's parents afterward." "Hey," she turned to me with a big smile. "I gotta meet your mum and dad sooner or later, haven't I?" Oh. The bottom dropped out of my stomach. That was far worse than Evelyn's glare. I suppose you should." "You should." "The answer is still no," Evelyn said. "And we need to show Heather the map," Rain said, as if it was an afterthought. "Ah. The map," I echoed. I'd forgotten. Evie's map of the universe. Gonna have to do it eventually, so we may as well kill two birds with one stone. We can peep the map and then chill out, do whatever we want. We don't even have to stay there more than one night. I promise." Evelyn let out a heavy sigh, mood sinking rapidly. "Is that what this is really about? The map? You two go if you must. I'll call ahead and tell my father you're coming, he can show you the blasted thing himself." She shot a dark look at me. "You'll come running straight back to Sharrowford, trust me. Won't even make it through the front door." Rain laughed. Evelyn, I love you, and there's no way in hell I'm leaving you here alone. Then I'll invite Twill to stay for a week. How's that, Does that satisfy you?" Evelyn snapped. "Will you allow me to drop out of your absurd trip then? Twill's got school, Evie." Evelyn waved a dismissive hand. "I am not leaving Sharrowford when there's still these vermin infesting my city." "We'll only be gone a few days," Rain said. "Your spiders have got this house on lockdown, nobody's getting in here uninvited short of driving a tank through the front door. You know that, come on Evie. Stop deflecting." "All right." Evelyn exploded in Rain's face. I flinched and could have sworn I jumped 6 inches back. "I do not want to go. All right?" She punctuated each word with a jab of her fingertip against the tabletop. "Is that what you wanted to hear?" "I don't want to." "God. You got me out of there, why make me go back again?" "I don't want to think about it anymore." Rain adopted an expression I remembered all too well, one I associated with the most emotionally comforting moments of my short life, that unconditional compassion and penetrating understanding, the look she'd used with me in that dirty Sharrowford cafe on a cold and lonely morning. The look that had won me. If I'd known what she was about to say to Evelyn, I would have hidden behind the door. "Maybe visiting the grave will help," she said. Evelyn's glare sunk into frozen darkness. For a moment I thought she was about to hurl her prosthetic leg at Rain. I opened my mouth and did my best to save them both, the only way I knew how. "Evie," I said her name as confidently as I could. "Don't listen to Rain, she's bullying you and I don't understand why. You don't have to come. Twill can keep you company." "Heather, I'm not bullying her," Rain laughed it off. "She dash. Rain, I scolded. Evelyn turned that abyssal glare on me. Oh dear, I thought, that was not what she needed to hear. I've completely misread her and I'm a terrible friend. Her mouth snapped open to bite my head off and I stiffened, ready to take the abuse, let her shout at me, but she stalled at the last moment, trailed off, left it all unsaid. She seemed to shrink, retreat down inside herself. She covered the stump of her leg with her skirt and stared at the cold mugs on the kitchen table. Of course I have to bloody well come. You'll fry your brain without me, she muttered. The vibration of my mobile phone woke me up again, just as we were turning off the M25 to take the long dual carriageway down into Sussex, as the London greenbelt sped past under the fitful clouds of the afternoon sky. I blinked at my phone screen and rubbed my eyes, then started as a follow-up message made it buzz in my hand. I clicked the phone onto silent with an embarrassed glance at my friends in the front seats. Why not give her a call right now? Rain asked, without taking her eyes off the road. You could pass the phone forward, I'll say hi. Absolutely not, I said. She didn't even need to ask who it was from. You'd say a lot more than just, hi. I'd die of embarrassment. No way, I'll be on my best behavior. I could introduce myself, we'll get all the awkward stuff out of the way on the phone. By the time I actually meet your parents they'll be totally adjusted to the idea. I'm serious, call them back. I see that grin. I know what that means. Rain took one hand off the steering wheel and mimed speaking into a phone. I rolled my eyes as she put on her best good girl voice. Good afternoon Mrs. Morell, it's lovely to meet you. I'm Rain, yes. Your daughter calls me mommy too. Rain. I blushed terribly and wanted to thump the back of her seat. Rain laughed out loud, but the mirth didn't last, drained away by the tension in the car. Evelyn didn't tell us to knock it off, she didn't even snort with derision or tut under her breath. She just ignored us, staring at the road. Deep down I knew Rain was trying to help. My stomach churned again when I reread the text messages from my mother. Let me know when you get there, dear, and send me the address, the first message said. The second continued, I do wish you'd have told me about these friends earlier. You know how you can get. I closed my eyes and resisted the urge to rub the bridge of my nose. Thinking about Rain meeting my parents felt almost as bad as hyperdimensional mathematics. 2.5 weeks ago I killed an invincible wizard with the power of my mind, and now I was scared of telling my parents I was gay. That was the most Evelyn had spoken all day. Rain glanced over in obvious surprise. Here, she added. I braced for a follow-up, but Evelyn folded her arms and slipped back into silence. I don't think they'll have a problem, I muttered. It's just. All very well in principle, but what exactly was I supposed to say to my parents? That I was a lesbian. Okay. That I'd known I liked girls since I was 11 years old. So far so good, sure. But that confession was far less daunting than presenting them with Rain. Here's my girlfriend, and yes, you may indeed notice she's obviously and vastly out of my league, and I still don't comprehend what she sees in me, except that having a person to protect appears to press all her buttons. Why yes, I'm regularly overwhelmed like I'm standing next to a raging inferno of pure sexuality. Oh, that gleam in her eye. Please ignore that she's probably a psychopath, and occasionally kills people for me. Why yes, I have watched her shoot a man in the head, how did you guess? In fact, in my most private moments I get turned on by the memory of how she moves when she's beating monsters to death. But we haven't had sex in nearly 2 weeks because suddenly she's handling me like I'm made of spun glass and won't. My own thoughts juddered to a halt. I took a deep breath and tried to focus on the trees and fields passing by outside the car. Won't what? What did I want from Rain? Did I want her to be lousy? No, it wasn't that. I didn't want lousy. I wanted Rain, oh yes, I knew that much, that was easy. Rain was treating me exactly like a responsible person should treat a trauma victim, so why did I feel this way? I couldn't put it into words. I thought I felt Rain's eyes on me, my guilty conscience, but when I glanced up at the rearview mirror she was concentrating on the road, still being a sensible driver, doing what we all needed. I sighed inside. I didn't deserve her. Then I flinched. Preem was the one I'd felt staring. The demon doll was staring down at my phone, reading the message from my mother. Could Preem read? I'd never thought to ask. The phone screen chose that moment to fade to black. Preem tilted her gaze to meet my eyes, wordless and without expression, then turned her head away to watch the landscape roll past. I didn't find Preem creepy or off-putting, not in the slightest, though I knew I should have. I'd volunteered to sit in the back with her, to give Evelyn more legroom up front. I hardly needed the extra space, I was scrawny enough. I still felt a deep gratitude toward the taciturn demon, for when she'd turned up in time to thwart the cult's attempted kidnapping. Her inexplicable changes had made it progressively more difficult to keep in mind that she was not a human being. Ever since we returned from the Sharrowford cult's pocket dimension, Preem had been changing color, like a ripening fruit. Evelyn had repaired her wounds with epoxy and wood filler, and Preem's exterior tactile glamour had fully reasserted itself, but her skin had continued to shift toward fresh healthy pink, her otherworldly blue now a mere underlying pallor. The icebound shade of her hair had lightened into a cold blonde. Evelyn had spent an evening or two locked away in the drawing room with Preem, trying to bring her to heel or bind her with stronger magic, but it obviously hadn't worked, and Evelyn wasn't talking about it now. The little human-like tics and gestures had only increased in frequency. Was Preem modeling herself on Evelyn? Aesthetic osmosis? I chewed on the idea for a while, glad for the distraction, and wondered if Preem was capable of selecting her own clothes. She was dressed for the trip in a turtleneck jumper which left little to the imagination, she was too busty for it, and I did sneak a guilty glance one of Evelyn's skirts, and some big boots. Her hair was pinned up in a loose bun to keep it out of the way, Evelyn's only concession to humanizing her. Preem must have sensed me staring, because she turned to look at me again with those blank milk-white eyes. Even without pupil or iris I could somehow tell she was looking right at me. I smiled at her. Yes, she intoned, voice like the resonance of a gently struck icicle. What was that? Evelyn snapped, twisting in her seat to frown at the demon. She speaks. Rain laughed. How you doing back there, Preem? Doing, Preem echoed. Sorry, I said. It was nothing. I only smiled at her. Then don't, Evelyn tooted. And you keep your mouth shut, she added to Preem. Almost there, aren't we? I don't remember this junction. Rain squinted through the car's windscreen, at the lichen-covered road sign by the village crossroads. Left at the green, then we take the road out toward Little Ropley. 'S that right, Evie? Hear that, Heather? Rain said over her shoulder. We're almost there. You awake? Quite awake, yes. No more sleeping for me, I was all napped out. Besides, after we left the main roads the landscape had become too enthralling to miss. We'd wound through tiny little villages and clusters of houses clinging to the base of the downs, the ridge of hills which dominated the skyline, and then plunged into the deeply wooded parts of the county. On a map the woods didn't seem like much, not a real forest. They broke and crested, thinned out and reformed around towns and villages, or opened out entirely into the fields between, strung along ridge tops or huddled in dark copses. One was never really that far away from civilization anywhere in England, especially in the south, but as tall trees crowded the road they penned the sky into a ribbon of dying light overhead, I could entertain the illusion of being deep in some mythical Uberwald full of werewolves and fairies. Of course, I knew the real werewolves shopped for video games in Sharrowford town center. Perhaps Rain had been correct, this was exactly the sort of decompression time I needed, to take my mind off Lozzie, off killing Alexander, off everything. But I felt guilty for enjoying the woods, the soft blanket of lowering dusk between the trees, the strange hidden places one might find in the undergrowth. Evelyn was so obviously dreading our arrival. I could hear the tight hitch in her breathing, feel the discomfort radiating from the seat in front of me as she brooded. We turned off down a country lane between high banks of packed earth, and I leaned forward. "Evie," I said, softly. "We're both here for you. You're not alone, okay?" A moment of silence. She shifted in her seat. "You are not in my good graces right now," she hissed. "Me?" I began to say. Then the trees broke like a wave. The Say estate loomed out of the gathering gloom, and took away all my words. Weeks ago, Rain had described it as a great big old farmhouse, and I'd taken that description to heart. My subconscious had summoned images of thatched roofs and twee little windows, smoke rising from a chimney, set amid neat fields and picturesque hedgerows. Somehow I hadn't internalized the darker implications that as a teenager Rain had climbed a wall to get inside, that Evelyn had spent years imprisoned here, that this had been a fortress and magical atelier for more than one generation of her family, that it had once brimmed with monsters, and worse. It was part mansion, part restored farmhouse, part rich man's folly in the cleared woodland, vast expanses of discolored pale brick between black oak beams the width of whole trees, topped with water-stained slate roofing. 2 sprawling stories, plus cramped attic space, of double-winged structure like a hunched toad, pockmarked with tiny staring windows, much of the glass set in ornamental metal latticework. "You are joking," I murmured. "We told you it was impressive," Rain said, as she turned the car onto the sweeping driveway of poured tarmac. The house itself was set far back from the road, and the driveway crept through an opening in a wall of irregular bare stone, probably once meant to look fashionable, now crowded by creeping weeds and draped with overhanging trees from the encroaching woods, the mortar crumbling away in wide patches. Black iron hinges stood bare, the gate itself long since removed. Outbuildings crept into view as we approached, a squat garage with 3 automatic doors, a couple of tucked-away sheds and once tasteful stained wood, probably filled with groundsman's tools and gardening equipment, and a dilapidated structure off to one side which had once been a stable, now abandoned to the elements. A beefy silver 4x4 was parked by the house, the only other vehicle present. Wide lawns and a sketched attempt at a garden stretched off behind the house, falling toward a dark expanse of still water barely visible in the failing light, and a dense tree line at the edge of the property. Even in the falling dusk it was obvious the gardens weren't really maintained anymore. Somebody had made a paltry attempt at fighting back the overgrowth, but roused little beauty from the threadbare lawns and thick moss. Old stones, old money, old secrets. On an intellectual level I'd always known that Evelyn came from wealth. She lived in a family-owned house while she attended university, but she lived like the rest of us. She loved her much-repaired comfortable clothes, watched Japanese cartoons on her beaten-up old laptop, never turned her nose up or acted too good for anything. The most expensive thing she owned was her own leg. Rain pulled the car to a stop in the semicircle of tarmac in front of the house. She killed the engine and turned to grin at me. "Amazing, isn't it? No wonder I wanted to burglarize the place." I stared up at the looming bulk of the house, only the very top of the roof still lit by the setting sun. "Heather. Told you you'd love it, didn't I?" I nodded, a little numb. "It is impressive. Sort of beautiful. The architecture, I mean." Of course, they couldn't see what I saw. The place was crawling with spirits or servitors, left behind by Evelyn's mother and grandmother. Dark hunched things with spindly grasping claws and shuddering leathery wings dotted the roof and walls of the estate, sunning themselves in the dying light or retreating into the shadows like sleepy lizards. Scuttering shapes darted and cavorted beyond the tree line, imitations of woodland animals, half-glimpsed hide and bristly hair peeking out of the darkness and then hiding again as I peered back. Something like a squid made of bark and stone sprawled inside the ruined stable building, blinking 6 huge eyes with incredible slowness, drifting tentacles through the air as if becoming more plant than animal. Rain popped her door and climbed out, stretched her arms, rolled her shoulders, and took a deep breath. The chill air crept into the car, but that wasn't why I shivered. "Let's get in then." "That your dad's car, right?" she asked Evelyn, thumbing toward the big silver 4x4. "I assume," Evelyn grunted. Getting myself out of the car wasn't as difficult as it might have sounded, at least none of this numismatic life was paying me any attention. And I wanted a better look at the monstrosity crouched over the house's main entranceway, guarding the steps up to the front door. It was a spider servitor, kin to the one outside Evelyn's secret occult collection in Sharrowford University Library. That one had been bad enough, big as a horse, an encounter I would never forget. This spider was the size of a fire engine. It was also visibly much older. The armored black body was mottled and grayed in places, flaking and ridged like the rusting hull of a great ship. Two of its legs thick as trees ended in ragged stumps, and the servitor's carapace was covered in pits and gouges, old battle scars. The biomechanical vent stacks on its back lay cold, emitting no whisper of heat, and the giant stingers were wrapped around itself in the way a tired, aged cat might tuck its body into the crook of its tail. Many of the spider servitor's crystalline eyes were dark and extinguished, but I felt a vast cold attention, felt the servitor stare back at me as I looked. The passing scrutiny of an old hound. Though it was completely, perfectly still, I somehow felt it lose interest in us and settle back into its borderline coma. "Didn't you call ahead?" Rain was saying. "Your dad is home, right? We're not blundering into the place when only his weekly cleaning lady is here or something, right?" Evelyn straightened up as she clambered out of the car, steadying herself on her walking stick and massaging her leg with one hand. She shot Rain a silent glare. "Hey, I'm serious," said Rain. "We don't want to freak out some poor maid." "I haven't been back here in almost 2 years," Evelyn snapped. "How would I know? If he has a maid he's probably screwing her." She frowned at Preem through the car window. "Get out." At least the house was lit well, some of it. A handful of the windows in the middle portion and the right wing glowed with soft light from behind closed curtains, and a porch light glowed above the main entrance, only a little obscured behind the bulk of the giant spider servitor clinging to the front of the house. The old tarmac beneath my feet was crumbling and cracked, but in other places it had been patched recently. Something sleek and small slipped around the edge of the house, then stopped and stared at us. For a moment I thought it was another spirit, but then I recognized that wonderfully curious vulpine face. It was a fox, a countryside fox, well fed on woodland prey, bold as it stared me down. I smiled to see the thing, then felt my smile die as the fox bounded away, replaced by one of the hunched servitor things as it crawled down the side of the house. I shivered in the cold air and slipped my hands deeper into my sleeves. As Preem got out of the car and Rain busied herself hauling our few bags out of the boot, Evelyn eyed me with a sidelong look. She didn't need to say a word, she knew what I must be seeing. Maybe it'll look better in the daylight," I said. Evelyn snorted. "What? What's wrong?" Rain asked, peering around the open car boot. I shook my head. "It's no worse than Sharrowford. At least everything here seems quiet." I managed a token laugh and a little roll of my eyes, but Evelyn didn't see the humor. She was staring at the house, and I'd never seen her look so small and hunched, so grim-faced, so unapproachable. I started to realize what we might be doing to Evelyn by dragging her here. "Evie, I'm sorry." "For what?" she grunted. Then the front door opened, spilling light across the steps, and a giant strode out to greet us. Evelyn's father was indeed at home. He was a huge bear of a man. Despite the initial shock at 300 pounds of 6'5" blonde bearded Viking bounding down the estate's front steps, I warmed to him instantly. "Evelyn!" he boomed, arms wide, ruddy face lighting up in a huge smile beneath a squashed boxer's nose. "You should have called. I had no idea." "Yes, well. Evelyn gave him a very level look. Here I am. He laughed, a jolly, rolling sound. Here, give your old man a hug. He strode up to us and lifted Evelyn right off her feet. I had to suppress a flinch. That would have been terribly rude of me. This man was no monster, just uncommonly large, in every direction. I contented myself with a small step backward, though I needn't have bothered. He was completely absorbed in embracing his daughter. Don't pick me up, you oaf. Evelyn spat. Put me down. He weathered his daughter's outrage with more jolly laughter, and set her down very gently. I couldn't help but notice he held on to Evelyn for a moment longer than necessary, to help her find her unsteady feet and brace her walking stick firmly against the ground. He'd swept her into that hug many, many times before. I wondered if he'd dropped her once, how often she'd stumbled and fallen over as a child, and used to her prosthetic leg and the chronic pain. Here, let me get a good look at you. I haven't seen your face for months, he said, hands on her shoulders. He pulled a theatrical expression of careful scrutiny, bunching up his bushy eyebrows. Yes, I suspected so. Suspected what? Evelyn snapped. That you are as fantastic as the last time I saw you, my dear. You've been drinking. 2 glasses of wine with dinner, that's all. No harm in a little lubrication now and then. He chuckled through Evelyn's very unimpressed look. A little, she growled. Oh, Evelyn, you really should have called ahead, would have put something in the oven for you and your friends. You're lucky I was even here. I spent yesterday night in the city. We just won a big case, and I went out drinking with the judge afterwards. All a bit hush-hush on that though. He winked broadly and put a stubby finger to his lips for a moment. So, tell me, how long are you and your friends planning on staying? The university term is just ending, isn't it? He cast a cursory glance over myself, Rain, and Preem, and didn't seem to take us in before he looked back to his daughter. All the way, till Christmas. I was supposed to be taking Christmas dinner with Angeline, but I can change plans. We could have your aunt and uncle over. It'll be wonderful, the house will be full up for once. When Evelyn had opened up about her past, she'd called her father a weak fool. No description seemed less apt for this animated giant of a man, the wide sweeping gestures of his ham-hock hands, the weight of muscle beneath his gut. He should be striding across some ancient battlefield in a Norse saga, hefting a war axe not squeezed into suit trousers and a neat shirt with the sleeves rolled up, in 21st century rural England. Father and daughter shared little resemblance except for the glorious golden blonde hair. Evelyn had inherited that from him, just as wild and thick, though her father was going grey from the temples upward. Everything else must have come from her mother. I'm not staying long, Evelyn grunted. Her father did a poor job of concealing his puppy-like disappointment, though he did try, and I believe in that moment I came to completely understand the man. Well, however long you're planning to stay, first off you should probably all come inside and get out of this damned cold. He laughed at his own simple wit, playing the gregarious host, making big gestures with his hands as he looked around at the friends who had brought his daughter home. Bloody right, Evelyn muttered, but she made no move toward the front door. He wasn't exaggerating. A biting cold was creeping up on us. Even sheltered by the bulwark of the house and the density of the trees, the December night's chill cut through my pink hoodie and sapped my strength, leaching away the lingering heat from the car ride. I seem to feel the cold more acutely these days, as if the repeated use of hyperdimensional mathematics had turned me partially cold-blooded. I did rather desperately want to get indoors. One of my greatest flaws, I was too polite to make a move before our host did. I scrunched up the ends of my sleeves around my hands. At least my teeth weren't chattering, yet. Have you eaten on the road? Evelyn's father was asking, as he gestured at the house. I've got leftovers, all sorts. Some cold lasagna in the fridge, probably some part-baked garlic bread to spare too. I've got some, he nodded in recognition to Rain, who smiled back at him. Rain, yes, glad to see you're well. Always doing great, thank you. She hefted our bags in one hand and closed the car's boot. And how have you been? Oh, fine, yes, quite. He swallowed, purging himself of a nasty taste. He turned his smile on Preem and I, and who are you two young ladies? You must introduce us, Evelyn. This is Heather, said Evelyn. She's my friend. A friend? An actual friend? Well, blow me down with a feather. His eyebrows climbed like a pair of fat caterpillars and he grinned with genuine delight and stuck out a hand toward me. Very pleased to meet you then, Heather. You have no idea how much of a relief it is that she's finally making some friends at university. He presented a strange sight, this giant of a man framed by the bulk of the spider servitor behind him, that he couldn't see. What was it like, living in this house, in the unseen wreckage of his dead wife's work? 2 minutes earlier I would have found him intimidating, but now I felt sorry for him. I gave him my best smile and shook his hand. Heather Morel, I said. That's me, I mean. Mr. Say. Do call me Louis, please. She's one of us, Evelyn added. Ah. Louis Say's smile froze for a fraction of a second, another fumbled attempt to suppress his gut emotional reaction, and this time it made me feel awful. For an eye blink, so short I would have missed it if I hadn't been shaking his hand, this Viking throwback was wary of me. Then the moment passed, and he was all welcoming and big smiles again. Ah, well. He shrugged, then burst into a good-natured belly chuckle. I shan't hold it against you. I was gripped by the most bizarre urge to apologize. Instead, for once in my life, I managed to say the right thing. Evelyn's a great friend to me. She really is. Ah, I expect no less of my girl. He beamed at me, though in my peripheral vision I saw Evelyn roll her eyes. That's wonderful, wonderful. And who might this be? Before anyone could stop him, Louis Say turned to Preem and stuck out his hand. Delighted to meet you as well, I'm sure I owe. Preem stared back. That little "oh" was so small and defeated. His bluff and bluster fell at the hurdle of Preem's eyes. Louis Say's smile died, leaving only numb shock. He retracted his proffered hand and took an uncertain half-step back from the doll demon. Preem just stared, a few strands of her long blonde hair loose in the wind. Louis looked to his daughter for help, tried to form a question, managed only to swallow. Oh, for God's sake, yes. Evelyn scowled. It's exactly what you think it is. Deal with it. I corrected softly. Evelyn let out a huff. Louis was absolutely lost. He blinked at Preem with a shadow of the expression I had imagined for my mother's face when I presented her with Rain, but tainted with equal parts fear and surrender. The look of a man who knows he is powerless to avoid certain horror. She's made of wood, Rain said quickly, stepping up to fill the gap with her effortless confidence and literally, stepping forward and handing Preem one of the bags, looping the strap over the demon's shoulder. Preem adjusted to the weight, tilting slightly. A life-size doll, you know, like a shop mannequin. We've had her for weeks, she's perfectly safe. Not that bright, either. Her name is Preem, I added. Louis blinked at me. Nah, name. Why yes. Yes, I said, and felt especially lame. He turned back to Evelyn. In the house. You wanted to come in. In the tremor of his voice I heard an echo of how he must have been with her mother, this was what Evelyn had called weak. My heart went out to them both. No, I thought we'd station her out here to stand around and scare off the birds, Evelyn said. Of course in the house, what's the point of having her otherwise? You lived most of your life with far worse under your feet. She shouldered past her father's wavering hand and trudged up toward the house's front door, leaning heavily on her walking stick. Have things he turned to Rain, a distraught frown on his face. Have things gotten that bad in Sharrowford? Rain smiled that endless confidence and shrugged her shoulders. Nothing major. We had to deal with a couple of problems, that's all. Preem's just insurance. Nothing major. I couldn't stop myself. Rain had the good grace to look a little sheepish as she shot me an apologetic smile. I thought. Evelyn's father shook his head, casting his eyes across the semicircle of tarmac and the thin grass beyond as if searching for help. She can come to me about anything. About our kind of stuff? Rain asked. Louis Say stared at her blankly. Then he swallowed and turned away, to follow his daughter up the steps to the front door, underneath the overhanging bulk of a giant numismatic spider he couldn't even see. When he was beyond earshot, I let out a huge sigh. That went less than well. Give him about 20 minutes, he'll be right back to normal, Rain murmured. Hey, he's a hell of a bloke, he spent 20 years dealing with her mum. You don't marry a mage for 2 decades without pretty thick skin. Rain, that is a deeply traumatized man, I muttered under my breath. How much does he even know? Oh, he's totally clued in. Sort of. She shrugged. He doesn't like it. Seriously, 20 minutes, he'll be cracking bad jokes again. Even if Evie starts an argument with him. Hell, especially if she starts an argument with him, that'll perk him right up. I shook my head, watching as Evelyn stepped inside the house with her father at her heels. The last dregs of sunlight drained from the sky, orange sunset snagged on the very tips of the distant trees. Darkness closed in tight behind us, rural darkness, no streetlights or urban light pollution out here. The windows of the great house cast the only illumination. Darker shapes scuttled and scurried in the deepening night beyond. When I looked up, I could see so many more stars than I usually would. Feed me a strawberry, Preem intoned. Someone's hungry, Rain said. Where's Evie keeping the zombie food? In her bag, I think. Later, I added, glancing at Preem's impassive face. Rain gently touched the back of her hand to my cheek. Her fingers were so warm. Hey, Heather, you're freezing. Let's get you inside, yeah. You know, the house has a couple of actual fireplaces, we could get some wood, light one of them up. I bet you'd love that. She smiled and took my hand in hers, moved to lead me up the steps. As long as there's no madwoman in the attic. I let out a little sigh. I suppose I don't have a choice now, do I? Rain, don't be ridiculous. You think I'm exaggerating? She asked, dead serious, and stopped 2 steps higher than me. The addition to her already considerable height advantage intimidated me in an obscurely pleasurable way. I ached to tell her so, and stumbled over a response. Of course you're not exaggerating, but it's still ridiculous. Why don't you tell me what to do for a change? I hoped the darkness would hide the blush in my cheeks. I hadn't meant to say that, and I didn't entirely know what I meant by it. On the steps of Evelyn's house, beneath a giant numismatic spider, was not the place to have this particular conversation. I eyed the giant servitor hanging above us, attached to the side of the house. The size of the thing sent a little animal tremor through my chest, but somehow I couldn't summon any deeper fear of the battered, ancient creature. This place was done, a long time ago. Heather. A curious grin broke across Rain's face. Should I be dash? Besides, I spoke a little too fast, a touch too loud. This place isn't scary. Not really. Like you said, it's got beautiful architecture. Sure, Rain nodded and eyed me with a quirk to her lips. Come on, we should get inside. You need to eat something before you conk out, at least. I nodded, but turned to look behind me one last time, still hand in hand with Rain. Preem had remained unresponsive amid all this drama, staring out into the darkening garden. At first I thought she was locked in silent communion with the night, and I was going to call for her to follow us, but then I realized something was staring back at her. That fox again, barely 20 feet away. It caught wind of my attention, huge vulpine ears swiveling to listen to all the little sounds of the night. It was beautiful, far more beautiful than the house, that sleek pointed face and deep russet fur, the way it locked eyes with me for a skittish heartbeat. Then it bounded away. Preem turned her head to look at me. Beautiful, isn't it? I said, talking about the fox. Beautiful, she echoed, her icicle voice lingering on the air. We didn't last 2 hours until Evelyn went missing. Rain was correct, Louis Say did perk up in record time. His transformation back to gregarious mirth was so fast and so complete that I would have suspected him of sneaking off to pop some pills, but he was around us the whole time for that first hour, not so much as 5 minutes in the toilet to fortify himself. Evelyn had forged ahead alone, but her father bustled back to the entryway, all small talk and big laughter once more, to usher us deeper into his grand echoing shell of a home. In the short walk from the front door to the main kitchen, the house revealed precious little of itself. From the white plaster and old tile of the entryway nook, we crossed the house's main corridor, a kinked spine with a partial skeleton of exposed dark beams. Shadows lingered in the unlit depths to our left and right. Thick carpets soaked up the sound of our footsteps. Louis Say was true to his word, he had a wealth of leftovers in his well-stocked fridge. He plied us with pasta reheated in an expensive microwave, fresh crusty bread and newly opened packets of fancy chocolate biscuits. There was something wrong with that kitchen. Something out of place. My mind chewed on the problem, as Evelyn brewed in sullen silence at the far end of the wooden table, as Rain dumped our bags on the floor and set about assisting Louis with the food, much to his obvious discomfort. Please, please, do sit down, it won't be a moment. Won't be a moment. Neither of you are allergic to anything, are you? He boomed about, clattering plates and cutlery to fill the silences. Never can tell these days. No. Healthy young women all of you, then. Double helpings. I'll drink to that, said Rain. The kitchen didn't feel real, none of this did. All faux rustic brick and shiny chrome fittings, thick slab shelves and tan slate flooring. None of it could disguise the tilted set of the walls, the cramped ceiling, the tiny windows. A modern skin over a reality far older and far less grand. Nothing in here looked really used, like the kitchen in a holiday house. Even the food in the fridge was too neatly wrapped in cling film, no half-empty packets of sandwich meat or forgotten bags of cheese. I sat down at the table, distracted, and Evelyn met my confused look with a dark frown. Why do you look so gormless, she muttered. I don't feel like we're really here. I shrugged. Lucky you. Her tone could have etched steel. A few minutes later Louis was in full swing again, once he'd sat down at the table and I'd worked out the best way to politely phrase my real question, between mouthfuls of lasagna sauce. Oh no, I don't do the cleaning myself, he boomed with a grin. You're quite right. It's far too much house for that. Even if I wasn't such an old brute. Ha. Yes, I have a cleaner in twice a week. Though, of course, there's places she can't go. Of course, you all understand all that. Of course. He waved a hand and smiled with boyish guilt. The whole east wing is mothballed, in fact, pipes drained, furniture covered. Must keep the property price up, you know. Can't be having it go to seed. Evelyn snorted at that, picking at her food. Her father glanced at her fondly and allowed himself an indulgent chuckle. Perhaps complete tolerance was the only coping mechanism he knew. Had he learnt that from dealing with her mother? The man did love to talk. I discovered he barely lived here, gathered he was a lawyer by profession, spent more time in London than out here in the ancestral pile, though he'd been the one to marry into it rather than the other way around. He punted easy question after easy question at his daughter. How was university going? How was the Sharrowford house faring? Was she getting any exercise? Did her leg need a replacement yet? All surface level. He didn't even ask how she'd met me. Evelyn fielded the conversation with monosyllabic disinterest, so Louis made the effort to include Rain and I, asked what I was studying, where I was from, what my parents did. What did any of those things matter? It's a pity Angeline wasn't down here with me this weekend, he said. I'm sure she would have loved to see you again, Evelyn. I know, it's a little strange for you, and she can never, well, you know. Family and all that. Dad. He blinked. I froze up. It was the first time she'd used that word. Yes. I don't even remember who she is, Evelyn growled. Oh no, that can't be right. You met her, when I came up to Sharrowford last year. He grinned awkwardly and turned to Rain and I, my lady friend. She was from another city firm. Rather a bit of drama about all that. A long story. I remember her face, Rain said. 20 years younger than you, right? No. Certainly not. Louis blustered and harumphed, then burst out laughing. 10 years. I know, I'm a lucky man. You old dog, said Rain. I kept hoping he would launch into questions about goings-on in Sharrowford, ask why we were towing a demon around, question how exactly I was one of us, but he didn't. He never asked a single real thing. He dealt with Preem by completely ignoring her. Pretending we were all normal people. Your daughter and I spent a night in a pocket dimension full of soul-eating monsters, where we killed an evil wizard. Why is this not important to you? The sense of unreality grew worse, and I realized it had been lurking there in the back of my head for 2 weeks. This inane conversation over a bizarre meal was a mere catalyst. Why did I feel like I wasn't really there, in that too-clean kitchen, surrounded by hollow talk? I should have paid attention to Evelyn, small and shrunken in her seat, staring at nothing. She was hurting. But I didn't belong here. I belonged outside, didn't I? With Lozzie. We shouldn't be here, I said. After the meal, Louis had bustled about finding us a spare room suitably near Evelyn's old bedroom. Not that the house lacked for spare rooms. By that point I was flagging hard, dragged down by a belly full of food and a need to curl up and shut the world out. Perhaps if I slept then this feeling would go away. Up a staircase with 2 small inset landings, through more corridor of bone-white plaster and dark brown beams. I glimpsed a servitor or 2 lurking down the hallways of the great house, a spider the same size as the ones back in Sharrowford, and some kind of monitor lizard in a cold fireplace, but they paid me no attention beyond a passing look. Once Rain and I were alone, Louis having bustled off somewhere down the corridor I'd sat, then flopped backward onto a clean white bedspread. We had a double bed in a high-ceilinged room, paneled in dark wood, dim wall lights sculpted as fake candles. Like a room from an early 20th century detective novel. Rain had rummaged in our bags for a toothbrush and a change of pajamas, said something inane about how I must be sleepy. I'd pulled myself back into a sitting position, hunched inside my hoodie with my arms folded, and spoken. We shouldn't be here. Rain raised an eyebrow. There was something dark and smoky about her in the low light, in this antique room. I meant what I said earlier. The moment you feel unsafe, we can be out of here. No, I shook my head and squeezed my eyes shut, partly to clear my mind and summon what scraps of focus I could. It's not that. Where's Evie gone? Her old bedroom, I think. It's just down the end of the corridor. Rain gestured over her shoulder at the half-open door, then pulled a sheepish, toothy grin. Didn't you notice? I tried to go with her, but she shrugged. I gave her the best hard look I could manage. Heather. I sighed, then set about struggling out of my hoodie. Suddenly it felt constricting. I got it halfway off my head before I felt Rain's hands on my arms, helping me take it off. I shook myself out and smoothed my hair down. I know, Evie's having a rough time of it, Rain was saying. Give her 5 minutes alone and we should go on a charm offensive, cheer her up a bit, get dash. A rough time of it? I echoed exactly as sharply as I'd intended, puffed up with indignation as I hunched on the bed. She hates this place. It's hurting her. I can't believe you bullied her into coming here. Rain laughed it off, my pink hoodie limp in her hands. Bully Evie? I don't think either of us could bully her into anything. You did, Rain. How can't you see it? It's like forcing me to go back to Signet Hospital for a scenic weekend. Rain glanced away from me, her smile flickering. She needs to face it. It's therapeutic. Rain. That's not your decision to make. I mean yeah. It hit me the split second before Rain crumpled, before she let out a huge sigh and slid down with her back against the wall until she was sitting on the floor, face in her hands. I'd never seen her so conflicted, never seen her struggle like this. I could barely believe the impact of my own words. Rain. Rain. It's okay, it's not the end of the world, we can. Hey, are you okay? She sighed and ran a hand through her hair, that rich chestnut hair, a few errant locks standing up in bold loops. I'd never seen Rain vulnerable before, not really, with the strange alchemy that lay in the junction between emotional distress and sexual attraction. I suddenly wanted to get up and go over to her. She wasn't doing it intentionally. I don't believe she was aware of the effect. I shook my head, trying to concentrate. Rain, I don't follow. Protecting? Rain gestured vaguely, at the house around us. An old magical fortress. One of the safest places in the whole country. Not for Evie, it isn't. Rain, realization dawned with a sudden click. Wait, is that why we're here? Rain dipped her head, an instinctive bob of pleading for forgiveness. That's why we're here, I said. Oh my God. Rain. I may have been economical with the truth, she said. You thought the Sharrowford cult was going to attack the house. Maybe. I stared at her in disbelief. If I'm right, she continued, then the house gets hit, the spiders deal with it, and none of us get hurt. Not you, not Evie. Maybe she has to spend a few £100 on a new front door, but that would be the worst of it. If I'm wrong, then hey, we needed to do this trip sooner or later anyway. You have to see that map if we're ever going to rescue your sister. We can leave tomorrow, I promise. Why? I swallowed, my throat dry, but Rain already knew the question. Why lie? I never would have gotten Evie out of Sharrowford. If I'd said I thought the cult might come for the house, she'd have boarded the windows and barricaded the door. You know how she is. Hell, I get the feeling you know her better than I do, these days. We both love her for it, don't get me wrong, but she's stubborn as an ox. You didn't have to dash. I'm sorry, she said, and I saw a tightness around her eyes. I know, I'm a shit, but I have to keep you safe. Both of you. And I'm not doing a very good job of it lately. What? Of course you are. Rain, I'm angry because you lied, not because I think you make a poor protector. For pity's sake, I watched you shoot a man in the head for us. That doesn't count for much. Of course it does, don't be absurd, I hissed. The intensity in her words, the passion, the iron-hot conviction, I felt myself shiver, and not in a bad way. My lover had lied by omission. I should have felt hurt, betrayed, insecure. Instead I was turned on by her justifications. This was vastly unhealthy, and I couldn't make myself care, because I wanted to feel turned on. Vastly unhealthy. Story of my life. I stumbled over a response. My words felt limp. You could have told me the real reason, at least. No, it's not, I hissed. Killing for me fine. Lying for me? No, never. Rain blinked in surprise, as if she hadn't expected that. Truth be told, neither had I, and I was too caught between irritation and arousal to consider the implications of my words. Rain nodded, puffed out a humorless laugh and smiled at me. I'm sorry, Heather. You've been so stressed, ever since we came back from that weird castle place. Like you've been ill, or at one remove from everything. I didn't want to stress you out any more than you already dash. Is this why you haven't been screwing me? Rain slammed to a halt. The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. We had more important things to think about, not least, whatever pit Evelyn was stewing in, all alone, but I couldn't help myself. A hot blush rose in my cheeks. I forced myself to stare at Rain. Heather. Her distress lifted just a fraction, a grin edging back onto her lips. Oh God, it felt good to say that. That's the most real thing I've said in days. Suddenly I hiccuped. So. You've been handling me like I'm a dying swan. Another hiccup. We have dash. Now she couldn't keep the grin off her face. Not in the good way. Hiccup. The good way. I rolled my eyes. You know exactly what I mean. Don't pretend otherwise. She spread her hands in a shrug. You want me to pin you to that bed and hold you there for an hour? Oh, damn her, that grin made my stomach flutter. That was more like it, that's what I'd needed for weeks. This was real. With every second that passed, the bubble of unreality deflated further, and I felt more human again, less cold-blooded. I gave her a bit of a look, more to cover up the pressure of my volcanic arousal than to tell her off for flirting. Come on, Heather. Yes or no? Yes, obviously yes. You know that. I shook my head in a vain effort to clear the pink mist, and hiccuped again. Rain, I haven't felt completely human since whatever I did to kill Alexander. Since Lozzie left. Like I'm still there in that castle, in that moment I killed him. It's always there. And I'm always cold. Rain wiped the teasing sexual mirth off her face instantly. She got up from the floor and crossed to the bed, sitting next to me without a trace of her former distress. She reached out, a silent question in her eyes. I answered with a little nod, and she stroked my head. You're right here, Heather. You feel that way because it was a traumatic night, and you made a difficult decision. You're right here. I promise. Then why haven't you been? I averted my eyes, blushing again. Courage had fled me. Rain smiled. I got it wrong. I misjudged all your signals. I thought you were feeling fragile, needed a gentle touch. You need the opposite. I nodded, deeply embarrassed, biting my lower lip. It'll make me feel more human, I said in a tiny voice. Sure thing, Rain purred. Not right now though, I managed, then swallowed. We need to talk to Evie, tell her the truth. That's gonna sting. Rain winced and sat back. No less than I deserve, I suppose. It'll have to be a proper apology. I'll have to fetch my genuflection mat, flatten my forehead a bit. We could have left her in Sharrowford with Twill for 3 days. That might have been therapeutic for her. Rain smirked back to normal. What, getting her laid? Oh, obviously. I still think you're off the mark. There. Twill's not into her. I held out a hand for my hoodie. Here, give me that back, please. I feel cold without it. Rain did one better than that. She helped me wriggle back into the fuzzy enclosing warmth of the hoodie, pulling it down over my body and sneaking her hands up inside. I squeaked and squirmed and felt myself flush. The little physical rituals of disarmament after a brush with conflict escalated too quickly. Rain got one knee between my thighs and suddenly I was on my back on the bed and Preem chose that exact moment to push the door open and step into the room. Rain and I sat up and parted, brushing hair back into place, like guilty teenagers caught necking. As if Preem cared. I hadn't realized how close we'd gotten, how flushed my face was, how we'd been inches away from grabbing at each other. Hey there, dollface, what's up? Rain asked, including me in a curious look. I shrugged. Preem stopped 2 steps into the room, facing us. To my surprise she actually made eye contact, or what passed for eye contact when one didn't Posse's pupils. "I have lost Evelyn," she announced, voice like a tone struck from a wall of ice. "What? What does that mean?" I blurted out. "It just means Evie's wandered off," Rain said, frowning at the demon as she stood up. "I'll go find her." "We'll both go find her." I could do with a little walk. "Walked for 15 minutes, Preem interrupted. Her head adjusted to regard me. "I have lost Evelyn." Rain and I shared another look. "Preem just doesn't know the house, that's all," Rain said slowly. Her frown gave the lie to her words. "She's like a dog in a building that used to have lots of bigger dogs living in it, so many strange lingering smells everywhere that scream threat but no actual threats." "Implying I am afraid," Preem intoned. She did not sound impressed.